You're muted, Sally. Oh, thank you. All right. Sally's running the controls for me this evening, so I can maybe focus on the meeting. We'll see how that goes. Anyway, so I just wanted to remind people this is an all remote meeting. Obviously, we're all here in our little 2-inch screens. And we can do that because the governor did his little extension there and allowed us to do this. So we're quite happy about that. So I just wanted to let everybody know this is a meeting that has no public hearings on it. So therefore, there's no requirements to allow public participation, although we're quite happy to do that. But because we have a lot on the agenda, I want to make sure that we kind of keep it to a minimum. And even the same thing with board members and committee members, you know, keep our comments kind of brief to the point and not do our usual rambling on so we can get through the agenda. I'm going to keep the chat open, of which I can see Jeff is trying to tell us that his audio is messed up. And I'll get to Jeff in just a second. But I'm going to keep that open unless it becomes a problem. Just if there's anything really important, put it in the chat. Otherwise, just keep all our discussions to the live discussion. And we do have a little bit of citizens time first, if anybody has anything. Other than that, I think we'll go through the agenda items and we'll have a little presentation from the planning staff. Then we'll keep the comments to the committees and boards. And then if there's time, we can also certainly open it up to the public. And I just want to, and I see Kristen's chat there too, which yes, Kristen, was going to change the order of that. So, let's see. So also with the comments, maybe we should we'll do it. If anybody from the planning board has comments first, then land use, then ZBRC. That way we can kind of keep it under control. We typically don't, we're kind of laid back. We just speak when we want to speak. So if it becomes a problem, then I'll ask Sally to mute everybody. We'll raise hands, but hopefully we can just keep this moving right along. And so that's really all I wanted to say on that end. Other than the fact that I am going to Kristen's point, I wanted to change the order. I wrote it pretty early on, but do this. We're going to do the warrant articles first, smoke shop, then the groundwater, and then the multifamily. So yes, we're going to switch the order of those. So I just want to introduce everybody. So I'm going to have, but first, before I do that, I do want to introduce our new zoning bylaw review committee member, Jeff DeBona. And I don't know, Jeff, if your audio is working or not. If you wanted to say anything, I'll give you a second. And if not, that's perfectly fine. But I just wanted to introduce you and we'll get going from here. I'm going to guess his audio is still messed up. Okay, so Brenda, who's here from the planning board?
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Great. Thank you, Sherry. Brenda Rappaport, Chair Planning Board. I am here with Bill Gaffney, who is a member of the Planning Board. Also with staff, Liz and Kristen are here with me. I don't know that I see anyone else from Planning Board. If I missed you, please.
I think the square underneath you, is that Caleb? Is that, yep, is he's from?
Oh, Caleb is also here with us. So Caleb is our newest Planning Board staff member. So I hope you all will welcome him with open arms. And he will, I think, is a great asset to our staff. So thank you.
Bill Gaffney is here.
Yeah, I said Bill.
You did mention.
Thank you.
Okay.
Good evening, Monty.
Okay.
Hey.
Thanks for joining me, Bill.
And yikes, what was that? Sorry. And Dave Webb, could you introduce the folks from land use?
Yes, I'm the chair of Land Use Committee, and I see we have Pat O'Brien, who's the vice chair, and Monty Pearson, and new member, Mimi Bixhalen. And I think that's all I see.
Awesome. Okay.
So thank you.
Great. Thank you. All right. And so from zoning bylaw review, myself is the chair, and we also have Betsy Hughes, the vice chair. And Sally Willard is here, Kathy Byer. I think it was Ed. I saw Ed Parsons, Mark Donahue, and our new member, Jeff DeBona. Did I miss anybody from ZBRC? Did I get everybody? Awesome. And Emily O'Donoghue is our recording clerk, so she's going to be doing our minutes for tonight. So thank you. And I believe I see Susan Cadillac, who is a frequent visitor, resident. Welcome, Susan. And is there anybody else that I can't see that I'm missing? Okay. That being said, then I think we can get this show on the road. So Kristen, we want to start off with the smoke shop. Is that right? Did you want to share the screen? Do you want me to share the screen? How do you want to do that?
I'm certainly happy to share if I'm able. You
Okay,
have host has disabled participant screen sharing. So if
okay, that's you,
I mean,
Sally. Can do
you
that?
have it. So if
Yeah, I do have it.
changed,
So I can
if
share it.
you do want
Okay.
to share. And
Okay.
I think I sent you the revision to groundwater, so you should have everything that's up to date.
Okay.
And I've fixed that so you can share your screen.
Okay.
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 want me to do
I
it,
am happy
Kristen?
to share. No,
Okay.
I can do that. Can everyone see this?
Can you make it a little bigger, please, Kristen?
I can, I think.
Thank you.
To move my screen over a little. Better?
Oh,
Perfect.
awesome.
Okay.
Our old eyes.
No, it's I had a meeting earlier and I was like, no, keep going. Yep, no more. I need more. So anyway, so if this was kind of as these uses kind of come up and we talk about they come in before us, and we try not to be reactionary. We try to be kind of on the front end of thinking about evolving uses, but things like smoke shops, I don't know. We had the conversation with the town center more recently. We're seeing a lot more smoke shops pop up just around everywhere. Not necessarily Burlington, but you see them more and more around towns in general. The conversation was a little tricky with the planning board. Actually, our assistant planner, our previous assistant planner, Brady Caldwell, so it was probably the most kind of concise way of saying it. He was like, why do we even allow smoke shops? So we really had kind of an internal conversation of, well, is this type of use something that we want as a principal use? The way that it's in the bylaw, it could be, and it is allowed, and just kind of talked about it with the other planning staff, a little bit with the planning board, but more along the lines of the more recent application for the town center smoke shop application. So what we have, and this was a little bit last minute, but decided because it was fairly straightforward, was to think about, as you guys know, when you want to look at regulating a specific use, you need to define what that is first on its own, not part of another use, and then regulate it. So what we have introduced is a definition of smoke shop. Smoke shop, as always, not here, but the registered marijuana dispensary has never been allowed as a smoke shop, and nor is on this, but just to clarify that here as well, that's a totally separate use and regulated differently, is to define what a smoke shop is and regulate it in the use tables. So what you have here is a definition and a regulation of allowing by special permit in the BT district and the IG at this point, taking it out of the general business district as well as the town center districts. And we are up for conversation on this. Actually, I think the legal notice, we actually took it out of IG as well. So I think it's just an SP and BT. So I apologize for not having that updated. So that's what this is. And I don't know, Cher, if you want to present and then bring back conversation, or if you want to have a quick conversation as we go through these for initial reactions and comments.
Kristen, Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Betsy. Go ahead, Betsy.
I was gonna say, I just had a quick question. If you're taking it out of IG, why are you leaving it in BT?
So in general, when you have a use, you should be allowing it somewhere rather than having it, because if you're taking it out completely out of the zoning bylaw, if it's not written in the zoning bylaw, it's not allowed. So if we're specifically defining it and putting it in BT, and there's only 3 locations of BT in Burlington, the Midas Muffler Shop, the Burlington House of Pizza, and the Shell Station are the 3 BT properties in Burlington, which I suppose could have a smoke shop location in those, but very much more narrow from the BG district, which, as you guys know, have hundreds of parcels around town. But what this does is help to define the use specifically. So Mark Dupal, I know, is on to what this is and what it isn't. So it's not trying to kind of, and Mark will tell you, and I will tell you, there's a lot of, well, it's kind of like this other use, right? Just kind of by allowing for a definition, it's a little more definitive. We haven't really come to the smoke shops are totally bad for Burlington. It was just smoke shops should be more narrow than they're allowed right now. And that's what we're presenting in front of you.
Okay, so I guess we'll do a small bit of a discussion in the sense that I feel like we should talk a little bit about each one because we do have the ability to, the deadline for print deadline is Friday, right? So is that correct, Kristen, that we still, if we wanted to make any changes, we could do that this evening? Is that right or not?
Well, so Friday is the deadline for the 45 days, and then the deadline that we talked about having the 45 days for when we decided what would go kind of in the legal notice to go to the print. Because council kind of came back a little bit later than anticipated. So I would say the print deadline is soon. I don't think they need to go to the print on Friday, but I have to verify with Lynn.
Okay, all right.
But we will be discussing these articles at our planning board meeting of August 18th. And I can tell you that they'll probably after that meeting is what more realistic to when we're going to get more final language.
So
since it hasn't
anything
even
we talked
opened
about
at the
tonight,
planning board.
You could bring to you anything we talked about tonight. Obviously, you could bring to the planning board next week.
To the 18th, absolutely.
Okay, all right. So,
So,
Kristen, can I just come back to one more thing? In this, the overlay district is both yes for A and WR, that's aquifer and all that, because so you already have areas where technically, I guess it's allowed. So I'm coming back to probably Brady's comment of like, why do we allow them at all in Burlington? Because if people want tobacco products, they can certainly get them elsewhere, but I don't find that to be a very family friendly use. I don't know. I mean, it doesn't seem to be in keeping with the strategy, for Burlington community. So anyhow.
Yeah, so just a reminder, the aquifer water resource, the way that overlay district was developed was that the prohibition, it needs to be allowed in the underlying district to begin with, if it's allowed in the aquifer and water resource district. The aquifer and water resource district overlay puts prohibitions that affect the aquifer and water resource. So for instance, if you have petroleum storage, say it's allowed by special permit in a couple districts, in the aquifer, it's not allowed as a principal use. So that's where you get the aquifer water resource provision. So saying yes in aquifer water resource is not broadening the allowance of the use if it's just in BT. It's just there for this particular use, a smoke shop is not a threat to the aquifer water resource district. So therefore there is not any additional protections or prohibitions that need to be put on it. And I know it has been, and every time I come to you guys with this has been confusing.
You good, Betsy?
Yep.
Okay, Monty, another question or hand up, and then Ed Parsons.
Well, since tobacco products can be purchased at grocery stores and supermarkets, convenience stores, and all other retail stores, I'm assuming that this change is part of our misguided persecution of people who use marijuana products. Is that the reasoning for getting into eliminating a particular kind of business?
So what this is looking at is specifically as a principal use, the smoke shop. So if you want to buy these products at convenience stores and supermarkets and grocery stores, that's still something that's allowed. So this is what this is saying is that as a principal use, this of smoke shop for these types of uses. As I mentioned when I began, the marijuana dispensaries, medical and or recreational, are governed under different use categories completely and not part of this discussion.
I understand the definition of what's going on here. I'm asking for a reason why we are attacking smoke shops. And the only reason I can think of is that people who use marijuana use these stores, and so therefore we will continue our persecution of marijuana people. I mean, I don't understand why this is being removed from town.
This is so we are kind of reading the tea leaves of what we're hearing from some of the process that we've gone through. So I would, and it's been kind of, we've had a lot of discussion about, is this the right type of use for our general business districts? And the general consensus we've had so far is not necessarily, and that's why it's being brought forward to you as a conversation to exactly, Monty, your point. Is this something we want to do? And understanding what you're saying and what it means. So I would have anyone else weigh in, and I know Betsy weighed in on a little bit on that.
Yeah, and I think that's the conversation at town meeting. So, right, it's there presented for us, and so that's what we can discuss. I think our job here is to make sure that, you know, in CBRC anyway, is the wording is correct, and any of these, you know, use categories, if we want to make sure of those. So, but as far as the general overall, whether it is or isn't, that's going to be up to town meeting. You good, Monty?
Fine.
All right, Ed, and then Sally.
Okay, so I will note that Mr. Pearson's question was not exactly answered, and one of the components of the mission of the ZBRC that we've articulated is to make sure zoning changes are aligned to the purpose. And so I do think it's important to clearly state the purpose at the outset. But we can table that. Let's think about what that purpose is. But pursuant to that purpose, I'm very interested why vape shops wouldn't be included in this. That I actually haven't seen a new smoke shop or cigar shop in decades. I've seen many vape shops pop up. And then I'll just throw out the second question. What is the zoning of the cigar shop on Middlesex Turnpike? I believe it's in BG. There's also a vape shop up 3A, but I'm not quite sure if it's in Burlington or over in the Billerica line. That's also a BG district. Sorry, Middlesex Turnpike might be an IG, but two questions.
So Middlesex Turnpike is IG. I still stand that we should have a special permit for that use. But anyway, as we're understanding tobacco, I think vape is something that we should be talking about here and seeing in terms of tobacco vape products, how is vape products differentiated from tobacco products. So I think that is part of the conversation. And to your general, why we are doing this, I guess, as I said in the beginning, you know, this isn't one of those kind of situations where we're trying to bring forward, like, we believe good planning is this and we should do it. This is kind of where we understood a conversation through an experience, and we're bringing this forward because we felt that there was some angst in that conversation and felt that we might be looking for a zoning change to respond to that frustration of that, the last smoke shop in the town center conversation. So, and actually, because Brenda's on, and I know it was a conversation with the planning board, I wonder, Brenda, if you had a comment on that. And again, these are things we propose. We go through this process of discussion to identify and ask exactly the questions you're asking. So we're in dialogue, and I think it's good. But if I can ask Brenda quickly, just kind of to weigh in a little bit on kind of the smoke shop use in BG, that would be helpful.
Absolutely. Thank you, Kristen. I think the beauty of town politics is that there's different generations of how we look at things. And for me, as a mother of, young children, I'm not super far out of college, but I look back and say, okay, well, I can go into a gas station and I can buy, a glass pipe that somebody could say is a tobacco product. But realistically, like, let's call a spade a spade. This is not what it's being used for. I teetered on the decision about the smoke shop being in town center for a couple of reasons. And never in a million years did I ever think that I was going to ask staff to write a decision to say there was never going to be a bong in the window or something of that nature. And, I think that, when we're talking about tobacco products or marijuana products, they're interchangeable. And, I think it's one of those things where we want to look at our community and say, what really are we putting forth, and what vibe do we want for our town center in this instance? So, I'd take my child to, get her nails done, or my son to go get ice cream, or both. And I didn't want to have an opportunity where I had to look at my daughter or my son and say, oh, that's a hookah. And not only did I feel that as a parent, but that's also what I heard from other parents when I picked my children up at school or daycare or wherever. And I think that, again, that's something we really need to take into consideration. So where we already know that dispensaries aren't allowed, the products that could potentially promote the same vibe are something that we want to take into consideration. So, that was my mindset. Thanks, Kristen.
You good? Ed, you good?
I heard what I need to
For
hear.
now.
Thanks.
Okay. I think Kathy and then Bill.
Thank you. I'm not muted, am I?
Nope.
Okay. I happened to watch one of the planning board meetings where the proponent for the smoke shop was there. Apparently, he'd been there 2 or 3 times prior to that as well. And I did hear Brenda voice her concerns about children. And I'm looking at this, and if you didn't bring this forward, does the smoke shop get classified as just any other retail business? Or are you, I heard Kristen, I was going to ask earlier, I heard Kristen say that that this was supposed to narrow basically the opportunities for tobacco stores. So can somebody, is my question not clear?
No. So right now, so by special permit in, I know the BG, I have a bylaw next to me, hold on. But is allowed as a kind of tobacco and convenient, there's a use category that would allow this more broadly as was determined under the town center category.
Okay.
So that is so that would be allowed in all of the, at least the BG districts. Let me check
Okay.
quickly if it's IG as well. So the use, the smoke shop type use that has been determined to fall under this category would be in many, many more locations available to us if we didn't define it specifically as tobacco as a principal use and then regulate it in a much smaller district. And
Okay,
that's what
and
we're looking to
there
do
were
here.
two things there that had this special permit, and now it's only the BT, which sounded
Yeah,
like.
I just checked. I apologize. So when I sent it to you, when we did advertise for the August 18th meeting, and in that advertisement, we just narrowed it to BT. So that was something that we had an early draft, and I did change it, and it is just in BT
Oh, okay.
as advertised.
So on some of this thing, I'm a little bit uneasy. Has the proponent come in and said, I guess this is makes some more public comments rather than looking at this, but did the proponent come in and say, we really want to sell the paraphernalia that can be used in marijuana dispensaries? We primarily, yeah, we're going to have tobacco, but we really want to be a bong shop.
No, they did not come in. They did not directly come in and say that.
Directly. Have you seen their other stores?
Yes.
And do they have a lot of paraphernalia?
Yes.
Okay, that answers what for me was a really serious concern. So next question. Let's say somebody wanted to open a ladies' racy lingerie store there. Would that be okay?
Racy lingerie and you can ask Mark, but racy lingerie and regular clothing are not defined differently in the zoning bylaw.
So
However,
they could
adult
open that, and you'd have to explain it to your kids, right?
adult uses are defined separately. So I mean, it would,
Okay.
but you know, is it?
Well, I'm
adult
not talking
uses?
sex toy shops. So, no,
Right,
I'm
we
just
have no
talking like
topic.
Victoria's Secret kind of stuff. You could have
Well,
a,
that's in the mall.
Yep.
I am,
Okay.
okay, so the rest of this, I think, goes to the floor of town meeting, it sounds
Right.
like.
Well, that conversation, right? All right. I
Okay,
think Bill.
but thank you for clarifying.
All right, Bill, and then Sally, and then Brenda.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Yeah, so I'm on the planning board, so I was at those meetings, and I'm actually the person that suggested to the applicant that he changed the name of it from the smoke shop, whatever he had going on earlier, to something different to make it more like a more cigar type based versus something that he was originally proposing. And I was one of the people that actually went to his store in Beverly to check out what he had, and there's a lot of glassware there and detox type of stuff, which was not what I think, as Brenda alluded to, with the vibe of the town there. So I probably have a little different view on it, where my kids are older. One of my kids is up in Burlington, Vermont, where there's a different vibe, as you can imagine, and the vibe is not necessarily against this. But that's the vibe that the town, the city of Burlington, Vermont, is giving a lot of college students up there, and it's out in the open, and you know they give that vibe and want to give that vibe. I think to Chairman Rappapoint's point is that maybe Burlington doesn't want to give that vibe, so that's why maybe in the town center, these type of places aren't necessarily allowed into. I think Mr. Parsons' point is that these are not to really sell tobacco products. They're for other uses relating to marijuana. So if we can get reality checks here, and it is what it is. Their intentions to do that, to change the name to what they said was Pinsky, gives a little bit of a different vibe. It's right next to a haircut in place. He can and will, I believe, sell cigars in there, which would kind of be a match. But if you're getting to a vibe of something different, so I think, yeah, it's what do we want to do, and where do we want to set the vibe is, I think, important when we look at that. But again, to Mr. Parsons, and I think we have the building inspector on, the one in Middlesex Turnpike and the one down on 3A down towards the Berwick line. If we can, and we've been talking, we talked about this, months ago. And we haven't engaged those folks. We should probably, if we could do that, probably even just a letter to say, come before the board to get a special permit would be something that I'd be in favor of.
Mr. Gaffney?
Yes,
it-
Through the
was
chair?
there- Yeah, it's Kathy Byer.
yeah, through the chair, if Sherry.
Yep, go ahead.
Okay,
Sorry.
thank you.
If this were not the location, if they were looking at something over on Middlesex Turnpike or someplace else, would there be less pushback on this, less resistance?
Yeah, and we talked about that at the planning board, you know, that the
All right,
specific
thank you.
location here was important, right?
All right,
Thank you, Madam Chair.
thank you.
All right, you all set, Bill?
Yes, thank you, Madam
Brent?
Chair.
So formal. Brenda, did you want to chime in again?
Yeah, just to kind of, and I'll keep it brief, just to mirror what Member Gaffney had said. If you look at some of the other facilities that the proponent had, that exist with the proponent, it's very flashy. It's all about marijuana facilities. It's about detoxing. It's about things that don't necessarily align with a standard cigar shop. And what I had said to the applicant was that looking at other true cigar shops where we're looking at like high-end cigar stores such as those that are in Lexington Center or other high-end communities, that's what we'd be looking for. Something where there's a higher caliber of cigar shop, not a smoke shop. If it was a lingerie store or a sex toy shop, I mean, I'd probably say the same
Not
thing.
sex toys, not sex toys.
Fair.
No, that's the wrong one. Lingerie, women's clothing.
Women's clothing is one thing, but again, like when we're looking at the town center, I feel like, and I think some may agree, when we're looking at the town center and the town center overlay, we expect a higher caliber of what our families and what the community is going to see and what is representing our community. And I'd like to think that, even if it was a lingerie store, you wouldn't find something more provocative in the window that would be behind closed doors. You might find just a nightgown in the window, as opposed to a bong. You might find, a cigar sign. And I think, again, being somebody who is, long-term resident, a parent, I know that other parents are looking for the same thing in that town center. And, we're all looking for, a better community and the best of Burlington. So, I mean, I guess that's where I'm coming from.
All right, thanks, Brenda. Okay, I kind of want to wrap up this to move on. I think we're in this because Monty, Kathy, you've spoken. Sally, you had your hand up, but I don't see your hand up. And this will continue at the planning board. So I just wanted to get that little bit out there. Is there anything really critical tonight, Monty or Kathy, or otherwise we'll move on to the groundwater?
Yeah. Kathy, go ahead.
Okay.
Just quick statement. I would really like to see some sort of a vision statement for the types of businesses that are appropriate, or retail businesses that are appropriate for town center, because I would like to just see something there that it provides guidance. That's all. Thank you.
Okay, Monty.
I just want to know if we can go ahead and use this example and outlaw gun shops too.
Well, again, there's a
I mean-
nice vision statement. that
I mean,
can go in with the vision
if
statement.
you start deciding which products you're not going to allow in town center, maybe I don't think that we should have a gun store there either.
All right. Dave Webb. Quickly.
Hi, first of all, so we got notices that a lot of these things will be discussed at the planning board meeting on August 18th. Is that correct?
Yes.
Is that's the next time? Okay. And because like we have a couple new members on land use, it would be nice when you're presenting these topics to define the districts, like what BT means exactly, because that's the only one where you have SP, special permit. So, and in general, I'd appreciate if you could define the particular districts, if that's what you're aiming for to discuss.
Dave, one thing you can forward on to your new members, which I can do to ours as well, is, and planning the same things, there is the zoning map. So kind of take a peek
Right.
at that and see what that is. It's pretty visual and easy to read. So that would be a good thing to do before next meeting. All right. Any, Monty, you're all set. Oh, there goes his hand. Okay. So Kristen, why don't you head on to groundwater?
Can you guys all see that?
Thanks, making it bigger.
Okay. I'm going to stop video a little bit. I'm having a little bit of blips, and I think it's just because too many people in my house are using internet. But if I stop video, it's not because I don't want you to see me. I just, it's you guys are starting to break up for me. So groundwater, as you remember, we had this on the warrant for the last town meeting for a 2-foot separation. One of the reasons that we pulled it was it seemed like it needed definitely a little bit more conversation, but also the Conservation Commission also continued their amendment to the stormwater bylaw. So and that gave us some additional time to research a few of the questions that had come up and look at, what is
Nope, she did break up. Oh, and we lost her all the way. All right, hang on a second.
Can you
and-
guys hear
Oh.
me?
Perfect, yes.
Yeah, I'm gonna turn my video off. I'm having, and I will share again. Sorry, I got logged off for some reason. Hold on, give me a second. I think it really doesn't like the share screen and video. Can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay. So gave us a little bit of additional time to look at a couple of the questions that came up, as well as look at, really the 2-foot. There was concern from town council just about just having it in the residential district. We, as I mentioned in the last round, we do have extensive review of stormwater, groundwater effect on commercial properties and commercial and multifamily and site plan review. So it's not as if we don't get at this, it's just, we get at it through the site plan and special permit review process with the planning board. And there isn't a separate review for a single family home because planning board doesn't see that. But when you look at a zoning bylaw, what Lisa Mead, town council, said, she said, well, do you prohibit this in other districts? I said, well, we look at it and make sure that it's mitigated. She said, well, if you're going to put this bylaw in place, you really need to look at all the districts. So what we have here is the same definition of groundwater, estimated seasonal high groundwater table, same as last time. The purpose has changed slightly, and it's because we are instead not looking for a 2-foot separation, because where we're really seeing the impact is if you have and you're not looking at my hand, so am I even doing hand gestures, but if you have a structure and you have ground and high groundwater, when you put something in it, you're displacing that groundwater somewhere else when you're putting that structure within the groundwater, as I think we explained last time. So therefore, if we're just at that, if we're not getting into the groundwater, we're not displacing a groundwater. So therefore, looking at, instead of a 2-foot separation, we're looking to ensure that either there is enough information to conclude that the the basement level, the slab or the crawl space is at or above, like is above, not at, but is above the groundwater, the estimated seasonal high groundwater table, to ensure that we're, one, protecting the groundwater, but also controlling adverse effects from basement flooding, pumping and discharge of groundwater to neighboring properties becoming stormwater runoff, discharging of groundwater to the public way, and illicit connections to the town sewer and stormwater. So again, the applicability is in all districts, not just single family. So therefore, all building construction, including single family dwellings, and additions to existing buildings or dwellings that increase a building footprint by more than 750 square feet. So, and that's the footprint, not the full. So if you have a 2-story, it's just the footprint of that addition that's calculated here. And so the requirements that the basement not be lower than the estimated seasonal high groundwater table, determined by same thing as before, licensed soil evaluator. What we have changed, and then compliance is always should be the inspector of buildings, not the licensed soil evaluator, of the proposed building elevation. So therefore, when someone submits a building permit for, say, a single family house that the planning board doesn't see, the building permit application must include information required to determine for the inspector of buildings to determine that there's compliance, that it is above the estimated seasonal high groundwater table. We also added, and as I mentioned before, all commercial and other construction will be under review with the planning board in that process. What we have added is that, and some of the concern from before that, that we didn't have if it's less than, what do you do? And before it was, well, if it's less than, you have to get a variance, and is the Board of Appeals really the best place to go to get that information? So what we have is that you must meet it if it's lower than the estimated high groundwater table. You must meet all these conditions. You need to have a detailed engineering plan by a professional civil engineer. And that professional civil engineer language is exactly as it sits in the stormwater bylaw for the definition of person, showing the foundation and perimeter drain management that will mitigate control of groundwater discharge and stormwater runoff, and the stormwater runoff that is created by that groundwater, some pumps, discharge, etc. So previously we had some language about roof connections, but that, in conversation with the Conservation Commission, is dealt with more in the stormwater bylaw, more appropriately in the stormwater bylaw than here. And this deals with directly groundwater discharge to be mitigated on site, and not just connecting to the town street system, because as discussed at the last meeting, the street system also goes somewhere. And that we want to ensure that there is an additional runoff downstream, not just to your neighbors, but to your downstream neighbors. And that a professional civil engineer must submit certification of the mitigation that it can be retained on site. So 5165, we were going back and forth if we were going to add this. The applicant may be required to pay for the consulting fee for consulting service to perform engineering reviews. So this section, this exists whether it's in here or not. We have the peer review statute adopted by the town of Burlington. So in the case of any of these applications, it can be asked for, but to the applicant to do this. It was discussed that maybe we should keep this in, especially to notify more of the single family homes, because it's not typical in single family homes, but certainly can be reviewed. And the last piece, relationship to other laws, is the same. What we had discussed is, it's one of the question came up like, well, do I have to dig down to estimated seasonal groundwater, high groundwater? You don't have to dig down. You just need to present enough information to certify that what you're building is above it. And if it's not above it, what you're doing to mitigate it if you're in groundwater. You don't need to dig 30 feet down to find it. You just need to make sure that what you're building and the elevation levels are not at the seasonal high groundwater level through a typical test pit process that most construction will undertake. So that is my presentation. I don't know if Liz, if you have anything else you want to add, and I'm open to any questions.
Liz, did you want to add anything?
I don't have anything. You know, as we get into discussion, maybe I'll be able to, maybe I'll have some answers, but as of right now, Kristen covered it really well.
Okey-doke. So I'm looking at my little list here, and I didn't do what I said I was going to do last time with ask for planning board members first. I don't see any planning board members with a hand up, so I'll go to land use. I see Dave Webb. So go ahead, Dave.
Yes, thank you. I guess my main concern or wondering about here is climate change and how that's plays into this estimated seasonal high groundwater table and how that's determined and how frequently it's determined, because that's going to change. I mean, we're in a drought right now, so the groundwater is going to go down. This probably also affects the Conservation Commission's stormwater issues too. So I'd just like a few comments on how that table is determined and how this plays into the fact that the water table will probably be changing more rapidly than used to in the past. Thank you.
I am not a licensed groundwater scientist or a specialist in groundwater. And that is one of the reasons why I've brought with me the conservation staff, which is a little bit more knowledgeable in other forums. So I think it's a good question. I can certainly look for a response. But what I do know is there's standardized process to understand seasonal high groundwater. It's not at that exact moment. It's looking at the soil profiles and over time. It's not at this exact time today. This is where it is.
Sure.
So that's something that's taken into account in terms of overall how climate change is affecting it. I can't answer that question directly. But what we do know and what we're trying to get at is that right now, especially in single family residential, there isn't any means to even determine or require where the groundwater level is before we begin construction. And the most important thing is at least to begin to start to get that information. So we know that moving forward with construction projects. So in terms of how things are changing around us and over time, I'd like to know a little bit. I'd like to understand and be able to respond as to how the science of determining where it is not just a moment snapshot, but a snapshot of a longer period that can give you that determination. So I know that's not the answer exactly you're looking for, but it's a good question.
Thank you.
So if I could add on through you, Madam Chair. So from what I recall in speaking with, Kristen did a great job and covered it in speaking with John Keeley and Eileen in conservation. John kind of explained that licensed soil evaluators will kind of, when you're digging your foundation out, they will look at the striations in the soil and they will be able to determine where that estimated seasonal high groundwater is if you hit it. I would also say that the conservation department would also say, if climate change is an issue and the estimated seasonal high groundwater does change, then this law will allow us to respond to it in the future because it's going to change and it's going to be different. And so when people are adding on, it's just going to kind of be a moving target. And so I think, I think it is something that is, this whole thing is a good thing for, climate change and reacting to the potential of climate change. So.
Thanks, Liz. Monty, I think I see your hand up.
I think that for a town meeting to understand this proposal, I think that at the beginning, we need to have a little a part of your presentation needs to be what the problem is and what is or isn't in the bylaw right now that is the problem. I mean, going through these red lines, and the red lines are crossed out, and some of the red lines aren't crossed out, and the blue lines, and some of the blue lines are crossed out. And so no one can follow what the thing is now, and can't tell from this what the problem is. And you did mention something about that we don't really look at it, but I mean, that was, you didn't say that in your presentation, and I would suggest that that needs to be kind of the first thing up, is that we have this problem, and this bylaw isn't written properly, and we're rewriting it to address that problem.
So Monty, that's a great point. And for single family, it's not written properly. It just doesn't, it doesn't exist as a requirement for review.
Okay.
For
So
single family homes. But
Some
for
just
commercial,
sort of
we do.
outline of the problem is going to be what
Yep.
town meeting will need in order to understand this, because otherwise we won't really be able to follow it.
Yep, gotcha.
Can I ask another question, which is that how does this rate relate? How does these regulations relate to the whole thing about changing the 100-year flood zones and things like that?
Floodplain and groundwater are, as John Keeley, and when we were talking about it 2 days ago, said floodwater and floodplain is different than groundwater. So that is a different section getting at the flood zone, floodwater, flood maps. So good question, and it is different, and maybe that is something that we should also kind of outline, that stormwater, flood zone, and groundwater are 3 different things, however, all deal with water.
Right. Okay.
Ways. Yep.
Kristen, that may be something that is, if there's a statement about all of that in a couple of paragraphs or something, as far as the backup material goes, then that may save a lot at town meeting, where people can read that ahead of time. Just a little, definition of what all those are and how they do or don't relate to one another. I know it's not really relative to your warrant article, but boy, I think to Monty's point, I think that would help a lot of us that don't really understand all of that. So.
Yep. Oh, I get it. I can't say that I understand all of that, so I get it.
We'll all learn something. So let me see. I saw Brenda's hand up and then not, and I don't know, Brenda, did you have something?
Sorry, so I'm off video because I'm trying to keep my kids. I'm trying to keep my kids,
Video.
they're with their tablets right now, so they're not bothering mom while I'm doing this. I think that, when I originally joined the planning board and not understanding the concept of the groundwater and the effect of construction and how it has affected other, residents, that was a big thing that originally that had come forth and has been a problem. And there's been folks that, because they have relationships with other people throughout the community, were in fear, and they didn't want to come forth and say, oh, well, you know what, X builder had built a house, and next thing you know, my basement was flooded. There were a lot, and I said this before, there are a lot of very reputable builders, but there are a lot of people who want to make a name for themselves, especially knowing that the return that they can get in the town of Burlington, and want to, be a new builder. They don't necessarily have the know-how. And in turn, as a planning board member, I've received multiple emails, and the planning board as a whole has received multiple emails and complaints about, water in their basement, water wherever, in their driveway. I think this is a point of change where folks have complained to different departments, and the planning board is trying to rectify those complaints and trying to move forward in a positive manner to make things better. And it's not calling out one person or another, but it's calling out our peers, our neighbors, and those folks, that are coming into town who may only be able to, afford that small ranch, but then next door, the McMansion is being built. So, my focus and my passion behind this specific bylaw comes from the fact that like we need to protect our neighbors. So I want to make sure that, and we can absolutely show examples, and we have in previous meetings, but when we move forward to town meeting, I will ensure that there are numerous, at least more than two, where folks have been painfully in detriment by construction that has been built by adjacent properties. So I want to put that out there. Thank you.
Thanks, Brenda. All right, anybody else from planning? Did I see? All right, I see Ed has a hand up, and then Mark.
Thanks. So I agree very much with that statement of purpose we just heard, and it's important to deal with that. I think we do need to tighten the explanation, and I think part of that explanation is in making sure we have a real good handle on the specific metrics and requirements here and what they mean to the geology to make sure we're optimally addressing the problem. And that's a very technical matter. So that's a discussion for another day. I have a process question, which is that those technical requirements have to be aligned perfectly with the general bylaw on stormwater management, I imagine. And so the ZBRC's mission is to fine tune language and make sure we're saying what we mean to say. But if I guess I'm asking if the intent is to align it perfectly with similar language in the general bylaw that pertains to stormwater management. And if so, then our process should be facilitating a frequent meeting of the minds between general bylaw review and this zoning bylaw, rather than trying to tweak this in isolation. So could we, hear about the general plan with regards to aligning this to the general bylaw?
So as I mentioned, both previously when we were talking about this and then tonight, is that there are two entities right now that deal with stormwater: the Conservation Commission under Article 14, and the Board of Health under their regulatory powers when there is a complaint. So what we are looking, and those are both stormwater based, and as mentioned, stormwater and groundwater are slightly different. When groundwater has to be discharged somewhere because it's creating, it creates the problem, it becomes stormwater. But the displacement of groundwater alone is not dealt with anywhere. And what we're trying to do here is to fill that void of understanding in construction of when groundwater is displaced, when it causes the problem. If we're not displacing groundwater, we're not creating a problem in stormwater or whatever, or even further groundwater problems. But and what this is trying to do is identify if there's going to be a problem, and so therefore avoid it. So in either to not displace groundwater at all, or to, if so, have a plan for the mitigation of it. And in some of that plan, there is going to be overlap where groundwater becomes stormwater and where the stormwater bylaw is triggered. And further down the road where the Board of Health may, from a complaint-driven process, have to address the situation. What we're trying to do here is getting on the front end to alleviate all of those issues so we don't run into them. But to Ed's point of how do they kind of dovetail between each other, as I mentioned, we took out things like roof drains and other things because they are more related to stormwater, and we wanted to make sure what we were really looking at here is that missing link in the puzzle of what was happening in construction that was negatively affecting our neighbors or downstream. And so, and some of the language is changed here as well, to try to get at, to make sure it's a little bit more consistent and understanding between the general and zoning bylaw on this particular topic.
You good, Ed?
Yeah,
Okay,
thanks.
Mark, I'm gonna hold off on you, Mark, because Susan is on the general bylaw review. So Susan, chime in here for a minute and see if you can maybe help on that as well.
Okay. Hi, everybody. I'm Susan Cadillac. I'm on the General Bylaw Review Committee, and I also was on the Stormwater Subcommittee. So I am very familiar with how that all landed. And as Kristen said, they are two separate types of water that you're dealing with. So with the stormwater, we're talking about water that is coming off the roof, down the gutters, and just kind of landing on the property, and where is it going? So the way that bylaw ended is that all new construction will require an engineered system to take all that water off the roof and bring it into a system that is going to be infiltrated on the property, so that it's not running down the street, running to the neighbors and going, who knows where. And what we're talking about here with groundwater is water that's coming from basically underneath the basement floor. So the way these two in practice will work hand in hand is that engineering plan that is going to design that stormwater system is also going to take a look and say, okay, we're taking water from the roof, putting it into the system. Do we also need to direct water that's coming from the ground into the system so that we don't have a sump pump line running, on the grass that's flowing to the neighbors and flowing, or in some cases, people put them out in the street, just to contain that water on the property so it's not going everywhere and causing a problem. So that, I think, in practice as a builder, when you're preparing to go ahead with the project, that engineering plan, with this proposal and the stormwater proposal, is going to kind of look at that as a whole and say, okay, what potential water issues do we have here, and how do we deal with them so that they are on the property and not causing an issue.
Thanks,
that.
Susan.
Answer. You're welcome.
Is that good, Ed? At least for now?
Yeah, yes, thanks. And I think I understand better what I need to understand about how the geology affects the other, stormwater versus
I think that's the key in those
groundwater.
three definitions or explanations of what all those are. Then they kind of figure out how they all go together and overlap. Go ahead, Mark.
So my question really is fun. Why was the 2-foot buffer removed from this? This is one of my sort of big questions here, is that with absolutely no buffer between the seasonal high groundwater that we're having now versus the possibility of future groundwater changes with global warming and all this sort of thing, wouldn't it make sense to keep some sort of a buffer in there?
So when you ask a direct question of where is the moment that you could create harm that needs to be mitigated, it's when you're below, when you're displacing groundwater. So, and when talking with John Keely and Eileen in conservation, it was, where is the 2 feet? Because what you see is a 2-foot separation commonly across the board in a requirement for all drainage systems. So if you have a drainage system, there must be 2-foot separation in order for the drainage system to be able to kind of have that amount of space to infiltrate before you get into groundwater and other kind of engineering things that need to happen. For the separation of a slab or basement level, or it was taking that 2 feet and kind of bringing it over to this in a way that, oh, well, it's universal for drainage, but the slab isn't infiltrating anything. So where the harm begins is below the groundwater. So the 2 is somewhat arbitrary, but I completely agree and understand that. Is there a reason that we should be buffering? But we wanted to put forward, to make sure that we're looking at where that harm is created. If you want to create a buffer, as we understand, more about climate change, I mean, that's certainly up for discussion, but where we see the issue created is at below the groundwater. So that's why we're seeing the difference, because the 2 foot, where we found people put in the 2 feet, it was taken from more of the stormwater handbook and drainage manuals than the actual distance from groundwater for rationale. So, and if anyone else has more to say about that, I'm happy to defer to them, but that's the conversation and why it has changed.
Kristen, if I could, Sherry, if I could jump in to kind of add on to Kristen. So kind of how I think about it in my head is, so the stormwater handbook for Mass DEP, it's really talking about septic systems. And so your septic system has to be 2 feet above the estimated seasonal high groundwater so that the water can infiltrate down. Where you have a basement slab, you don't need that space to infiltrate. So that's why it was removed. So if that helps.
Okay, thank you.
You good? All right, Sally, and then Kathy.
Thank you. So I might need to come sleep on somebody's couch for saying this. So you may not know it, but your town moderator, who retired 2 years ago, he is a licensed site professional and geologist. His main clients were working with municipalities, and this is exactly up his alley. And I'm going to volunteer that if any of you have questions or want this explained, call up and have a phone conversation, or invite him out to coffee, or set up a meeting where you can all pounce on him with your questions at the same time. He is no longer insured and licensed, but he can give you the main information so that you can go and talk to somebody else about any of your questions that are in this particular bit. And he can explain the difference about all the different types of water runoff. I wanted to really commend the difference that I see here is between 5162, and as long as you're up above that, the groundwater, you don't have to go through all of the extra expense for the licensed site professional and all the others. And 5164, I think Kristen, you folks and whoever else was involved did a nice job of separating out these two. And I think that that's good. Brenda, you commented about driveways and other things that people talk to you about. And a lot of times those don't have anything to do with groundwater. They have to do with issues caused by the builder. So I did appreciate where you said inexperienced builders were doing some of these. And that sounds like a different question. I do have something specifically ZBRC relevant, and that's on 5165. It says the applicant may be required to pay the fee for consulting services. And that's not clear to me how that gets determined. Do you just get to say, well, some homeowners have to do this and others don't? Or we meant that if you're building an office park, that is going to be different than a single family residential. So this looks to me, just off the top of my head, as I don't understand who's going to pay fees. I don't know if it needs to be here or not, but that raised a flag for me. I'm
So
done.
Kathy, this is Kristen. So that's a good point. And as I mentioned before, the reason we added it, so in general, the town of Burlington and review departments have adopted the provisions of chapter 44, section 53G, which is the peer review statute, which outline all the questions that you've asked and the adoption of those. So why we added it, and we were going back and forth, I mean, does it need to be, does it not need to be, is really just for a, by the way, because this did have to do with an audience that we don't typically work with from the planning department in terms of more commercial and larger multifamily developments. As I mentioned before, if it's in here or it's not in here, it still applies under the town of Burlington's adoption of the provisions of chapter 44, section 53G. So it's I don't have a strong feeling. Does it have to be here or not? It's just, and we could write it differently, that the town has adopted these provisions, and I mean, and kind of.
I'm troubled by the language. I understand what your purpose was here. I'm troubled by the language. It's just
I
not
think
clear how it is applied.
so when they come, Kristen, is it when an applicant comes before the board, if there is reason that the board has, you know, to question, to do a peer review, they can just request that, right?
Yes, but I think for what our kind of mission is here is, can we clarify, do we add the actual language or do we move it entirely? And I think we have to think about that a little bit.
It's those two
I think
words,
your purpose was
maybe.
so it's not a catch-up. It's
Yeah.
not a gotcha or a catch-up later on down the road when the applicant comes to you. It's here because it's written. It's already implied because Burlington's adopted it, but at least if it's here in this statute, you know, in this particular zoning bylaw, then the applicant is aware ahead of time that this is something that may happen.
So
But I get your point, Kathy. You're just talking specifics to the language.
you
Kristen,
compare one builder versus another builder, and one had to pay for the consulting services and another didn't, and what determined that? And it's just, it looks like that is a problem waiting to happen down the road to me. Okay, I'm done. I'll go mute. Thank you.
All right, Sally, and then Brenda.
Thank you, Sherry. My question concerns section 5.1.6.4, number B. And that is because in the past, our house is on a hill. We're the next to the top. And every spring when we'd have a heavy rain and lots of snow, we would get water in the basement, sometimes like 6 inches deep, depending on the winter weather. And so we didn't have a sump pump because, of course, when you're at the top of the hill, do you really need a sump pump? So we would pump it out into the back. And sometimes get a little garden hose and send it out to the front, which means it was ultimately going down the street. It no longer happens because in our the construction that we did, apparently they built something in that keeps the water where it should be. So it has someplace else to go and not up into the basement. But my question is, in a case like that, where someone has, you know, we have a huge rainfall and it comes up from the basement, is there going to be something in here that says that if that happens to an existing structure, an existing home, that you must do something to mitigate? Or is this simply for new construction? Thank you.
So Sally, this bylaw is written for new construction and additions over 750 square feet. If you have an existing home that has an existing issue, that would need to be either, I mean, dealt with separately. I know the engineering department for a long time, maybe 10 or 15 years ago, had the sump pump, what was it called? The sump pump, it was like the kind of grace period, but it was the you know, tell us what you're doing now, because in the inflow and infiltration program with engineering, that was because we were under a DEP mandate that for every gallon we put in, we had to mitigate 11. So all of these, moratorium, a moratorium on discharge from people who had their sump pumps going directly in, or have a hose out into the storm system, because the storm system, we were sending too much in the storm system. There's too much. Anyway, so they have the program of mitigating some of these connections in a variety of different ways. But anyway, so in a long-winded way to saying that, Sally, for existing homes, that's dealt with in different sections of the law and in the different departments. This is only new construction and 700. If you built a 750 square foot addition on your house, that new 750 square foot addition couldn't add additional discharge out to the street. Your existing, what you have existing is what you have existing.
Okay. And tell me about all the sprinkler systems that of course are not running now because we have a watering ban, but all those sprinkler systems that pour water into the street. I'm just wondering, where does that fall? And that's you don't need to answer it, but it's
that's stormwater runoff, which, as we already discussed, is not groundwater. So that's dealt with on the stormwater bylaw, if at all.
Okay,
So
thank you.
Kristen, I do have a question, Sherry. I do have a question as I was thinking. So you have additions over 700 square feet. Do the additions include like any accessory use building that's not part of your house, that's, a pool house that's out back or something like that? Would that accessory use?
If you have
building be part of
700
this?
square, if you have a building or dwelling that's 750 square foot footprint more on your property, this would be triggered.
Okay, so it does say building. I'm trying to catch up to where all the reading is.
Yep. So
is it
up
just
above
addition?
a new building construction or additions to okay, well, that's a good, so additions to existing buildings or dwellings or new footprint. Yeah, that's a good question.
Yeah, so I would add a new footprint because it may be a detached structure of some sort.
New additional, new.
If there's a garage with a breezeway or something that's not,
Yep.
I don't know what's an addition. Do we have a definition of addition?
Yeah, we'll look at that. It's a good question.
Okay.
The intent is that the 750
Right.
additional square feet.
I knew the intent, but I didn't know if it was what the real term
Yeah,
was.
that's a good question.
Ernie, I see your hand.
Just a quick question on the peer review, Kristen. Who could require the peer review? The building inspector? Is that correct or not?
Under this, the review authority. So for us, if it was, in our purview, we do. If it's, it could be the
Okay.
building inspector if it's just a permit through him, I believe.
Right. I'm thinking just single family houses, but this applies to everything. Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Okay. I don't think I see any other hands. So let's move along then. Again, this will be continued next week, so we'll move on from there. And Kristen, if you want to move on to the town center multifamily.
So as I am getting the share screen up, I'll let Liz give you the fabulous news of a document that came out today that neither of us have digested because it came out late this afternoon. And so Liz, I'll hand that over to you.
This was sent out to the Mass Planners listserv, and DHCD came kind of amended their regulations based upon all of our letters regarding MBTA communities. They tightened some things up. They extended it out a year, so it's not due in 2023. And so I haven't super digested it, so I don't want to misspeak. But they've tightened it up. There are more criteria, and there's a few more criteria that are going to kind of, I would say, protect towns from just crazy amount of building. But I can forward that along to you guys as well. But it's good. It's all good stuff. It clarifies things. So
That's great news. Thanks, Liz.
yeah.
Bill, did you have a question for Kristen before she starts real quick, or just something afterwards?
No, just ready when they say other questions, because last time I missed that slot. Thank you.
Get your hand up there first. All right, you got your hand up first. Go ahead, Kristen.
Okay, I am going to go through. So I want to preface this enormously with, as you know, it's something that we are motivated to move forward with because of the amendments to 40A, 40A, the zoning set, 40A section 3. However, we also understand that this is going to take some time to review. There's we did provide for a number of properties under discussion. So while we are moving this forward now, if we get to September, great. But my feeling is we probably will need an expanded amount of time to, one, digest the regulations that just came out this afternoon, to figure out how this fits within the state requirements, as well as really vet the conversation with the town and the town center town center group. So I just wanted to say that we're not gonna, I don't have the false hope that we will get through this in 3 weeks. So just wanted to start there. And sorry I can't have my video on. If I share, you guys go like, you all freeze. So if I have my video on. Okay, so what we have done, as mentioned, so there was a multifamily overlay that was proposed as part of the 135 Cambridge Street overlay. We worked quite a bit with the applicant team there to have that bylaw fit within the MBTA community's regulations, as well as where we thought, we as planning staff thought we should have kind of how the regulation should play out. So you are going to see a lot of similarities in what that district kind of was structured around, but there are some very specific differences. So, and I know you guys spent a long time with that. So I'm going to run through this rather quickly, but I will certainly pause. And then if someone else, because I don't have it up and I can't turn on my Gmail when I'm doing this, or you freeze, if someone else can pull up, and Liz or Sherry pull up the map of parcels, the PDF map, that would be helpful.
I'm already doing it. I'm already opening it up.
Okay, and then if you can talk about that after I run through this. So what we're looking at is the town center multifamily overlay. We understand that the MBTA communities 48 section 3 is looking at a town-wide, but as I've mentioned in the past, what we are looking at for a zoning criteria in the town center is always going to be different than what we do in the rest of the town, for the key purpose that the town center is a defined district with design review. And if we have a district that is kind of out, if we want to keep those provisions, we need to be kind of looking at this specifically in the town center. And so we wanted to start there, since we've kind of begun talking about the town center district. And I think there's some parcels of interest that for housing. So this is town center. It's an overlay district within, and we actually, the last proposal was just the central business district. We have central business district and the civic center district, and that's totally open for discussion, but that's the version you have here. So it's a new district, town center multifamily. It allows, cover. So we left it as kind of a no with special provisions in Article 4. So that the uses, and this was amended by you guys actually to kind of clarify in the last round, and I think we kept that amendment. So let's see. So what is in red, I think, is specifically different from the last round. So obviously the map changed. So as I mentioned, central business district and civic center district. So the entirety of the town center can be considered for rezoning into this multifamily district. It's not automatic, and then we'll get to the map next. So what we did add, there was in the statutory amendment from the legislature, it had three things. That it must be by right, multifamily by right, it must be at least 15 units an acre, and it must be kind of family house, not age restricted housing. So in discussion with folks along the way, and we'll see in this final version, it was, do we need to put 15 units as in the bylaw to meet MBTA? And the resounding answer was yes, we should. So that's what you're seeing here. But what you're also seeing here carefully, and this is again something we need to look at the regulations, is it's 15 units an acre of upland lot area. So if you have, and this was one of the comments in the comments of the regulations, because it was, oh, it just needs to be 15 units an acre. Well, what if you only have half of it that's developable? That should be, you know, half of that. So what we're proposing here is it's 15 units an acre of upland developable acreage. So if you have 2 acres and half of it's wet, it's still 15 units. And again, that's something we need to review, but that's kind of where we wanted to make sure that we were getting a hold of the density. The minimum front yard was just something that was something I think we needed clarified in general. Hold on a second. Okay, if you guys remember, there was this whole section that of the planning board can waive all these dimensional requirements. We felt that was too broad, but we did feel there was some reason to have the planning board look at a few of the areas if the certain criteria was met. So there, in the last round, there was a whole new section, planning board can waive all this criteria. We took that out completely. And what we did is in certain dimensional criteria, added a few measures that could be considered by the planning board. And that includes the buffer. If certain things are done, it could be a lesser could be waived by the planning board. No less than 10 feet as written here. I know it's so boring just me going through this, so I apologize. We did also increase the building to ground area percentage. And that's something I think we probably need a graph to talk about a little bit more, a graphic.
That would be helpful.
We went a little higher the farther you were from residential as we were looking at the map. Clarified that section, and that's about it. So I know it seems like a lot, and we went through it pretty heavily around the last round, and I think there's really an exercise we need to go through to match it up with whatever these new regulations look like. So I'm going to pause here. I want Liz to show you the map, and then we can come back and talk about the provisions, if that's okay with you, Sherry.
Yep, that's good.
All right, I'm going to stop share. Liz, can you share?
Sure can. So here is the map. It's not my best map. It's a serviceable map, but it kind of gets the idea across. So these were kind of high level. We looked at kind of the housing section of the master plan, like what were kind of the recommendations there, which was adding multifamily properties to create buffers between commercial and single family residential, areas that kind of we thought could be revived. You'll notice Grant Ave. This is Grant Ave.
So
we have
yeah,
Shaw's.
Liz, can you orient us as to where everything
This is my world and not yours. I'm sorry.
Yes.
Let me orient you.
So-
Here's the town hall. This is the Common, Simon's Park. This is the 135 Cambridge Street property. This is Cambridge Street. Cambridge Street, Center Street, Bedford. This is Shaw's. True North is here. That helps. That always helps me. So if that's kind of where we're looking at. This is the town center and these, so the whole town center, but it's a CBD, the central business, and the civic center. And so these are the back of the napkin. I looked at the map and looked at did some ground truthing as what do these sites look like, and places that I think would be good buffers to allow for, could be mixed use, could be just multifamily housing. To be determined at this point. So one thing I do know is that there's a lot of local neighbors on Grant Ave, or who abut Grant Ave and those properties, and they have been vocal about saying, we would much rather have multifamily housing than an industrial use in our town center.
Liz, do you mean Terry Ave over there?
Terry Ave.
Terry Ave, what am I saying? I'm not saying Terry Ave. Thank you, Bill. I'm saying something else, Terry Ave. Terry Ave. And so we have vocal abutters who kind of don't love the uses there. And I can understand that they're not super, they don't work well with single family next door. We looked at Grant Ave back here. These are all kind of warehousey, just, contractory space. That I think would be a better use, that would be a better buffer to have kind of a residential use abutting single family residential as opposed to more of an industrial use. And kind of also looking at parcels that kind of could use a rehab. So, the 135 Cambridge Street site, I know that the bylaw didn't pass town meeting last time. Planning staff was always housing should go there. It's a good use for that site. And then kind of looking at, I looked at the AJ Rose site. Just put it on there. It's, it's kind of a weird kind of back site back there that might be good. So this is very much back of the napkin, open to discussion. This was my first go. So about it. I'm all set, Sherry.
Thanks. Liz, one more question, because you did the bottom end, but way up at the top, there's another little section right up there. What's there? What's that section?
That is the Mass Glass site, because
okay, all right.
So if people, I believe, yeah, and that's one of those sites that we've been dying for something nice to redevelop there. I just put things on here that somebody please help this site. Somebody.
Okay. All right.
That's kind of.
Thanks, Liz.
Yeah.
All right, Bill.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I actually don't find this boring at all. I find this actually very interesting because when we saw this at the planning board back then, it was clearly presented as a way to alleviate spot zoning for the 135 project. It was project that was in front of us, and all of a sudden they said, "But the way to get that is to make the whole town center by right for multifamily." I think during town meeting, which my baptism to that was interesting, that Mr. Eiler, when this was being discussed, came out and said, "What are we trying? What's the end goal here? What problem are we trying to solve?" And I heard today that we're trying to solve the 40B3 with the MBTA piece, which has just gotten out there. When I attended Melissa Tenkopoulos' Middlesex Turnpike activity, there was a breakout room with the Jordan Marsh real estate director, and he says, "Yeah, we plan to put housing on the Jordan Marsh property." And there's all sorts of talks about housing along the Mall Road corridor, the Middlesex Turnpike corridor to get that going. And then you had the other. Third Ave, and 300 units going up there. As we talked to those guys, they want to put up another 300 units there. So I think there's opportunity throughout the town to be able to address the MBTA requirement, which is really, you said, has just come out now. And again, if they're talking about taking a bus route off, questions I have with that is, what are the ramifications of that? Well, we lose grant money, we lose money that we're getting from MBTA. How much we lose versus them taking away a bus route? And do we have to do this at all? So this is the bigger question to me. I'm really excited to see this. It looks like there's a date of 6/24/2022 as a planning board member, and we're presenting this to town meeting potentially next month. I agree with Kristen that this was, would be a complete rush job if we're talking back of the napkin type of parcels. I thought we'd have a little more time to figure out which ones may be appropriate based on, the requirements of the MBTA. So, yeah, if we can have more time on that, besides getting this rushed through, because I don't see the requirement to get this rushed through for next month. So I wouldn't even put it on the on town meeting, because what we heard back from town meeting is, how do you have something that's put forward by planning board that there's not a unanimous planning board vote on that? So back of the napkins thing is good, which, as a month and a half before it's going to be voted on by town meeting, I think we got a long ways to go on this, and we should be including other areas of town just to hit that. If the goal is to meet the MBTA, in the master plan, which hasn't been approved yet, but the goal there for housing is actually, it's affordable housing. It's not more multifamily housing, it's affordable housing. So what I see when I'm listening to all these presentations on 3rd Ave, I listened to the presentations from Melissa on Middlesex Turnpike and Mall Road, and I'm listening to this one here. It's increased housing, but not necessarily the goal. I think that we're looking for is affordable housing. So thank you, Madam Chair.
Thanks, Bill. To your point, I'll just add something, and then I think I saw Brenda's hand up. But to your point of including other areas, I certainly would agree that we should be thinking about those. This zone particularly is the town center. So, we would have to create a new name for something else in another area of town. And I guess my other point to that is, and as we see these regulations that Liz forwarded to us in the chat, and can forward other ways too, is that, if we are encouraging this kind of housing in the town center, and then they take the bus route away, or what is the guarantees that bus routes? So then we, allow for all this extra housing in the town center, and then if there's no bus, then we've allowed all these, residents to move in there with no transportation. So I guess that's not a question for Kristen or anybody here that we can answer, but it's just, in the back of the head of, maybe it's answered in the regulations. I don't know.
Yeah, and I see this, from where I sit in the planning board, I see this as nibbling, right? First saw the project come in, and it was the intent of the project, and try to get around spot zoning from that. And now I say, okay, now we're trying to nibble, and then we're including the 135, which may not be a bad spot for housing, maybe not all the units that they had or the height or anything. But the idea is as I saw planning, I said we should plan. And this looks like a fairly short term in trying to plug the potential MBTA that just came out today. And don't forget to include the 135 in the back of the napkin. So I think this really has a long way to go. And if we should call it something, maybe, instead of just town center, we call it multifamily housing zones, which might include the Hallmark Gardens and the other folk places that we have, to include that. And then you can kind of get an overall scope of things and actually plan, which is, instead of kind of nibbling at it short term. I'm kind of looking at the longer game here. Thank you, Madam Chair.
I could kind of respond to that, Sally. Is that okay?
Yep, go ahead.
Sorry. So I just wanted to say, so what Bill and everybody, one of the reasons that we kind of picks the town center first is because, first of all, it's a separate zoning area, and it would come under site design review that the rest of the town wouldn't. So we really wanted to hone in on that. The other thing I was going to mention slipped my mind, so I'm going to let everybody else move on.
Raise your hand if you think of it again, Liz. Go ahead, Brenda.
Thank you, Madam Chair. 2 points. One, you would ask me to, define my board. Ernie Cavino, obviously a member of planning board, which most of you know, is present. Also, Jessica Sutherland, planning board candidate for appointment by the joint meeting of the planning board and select board on Monday night, is also present. So I just wanted to make that known for folks, as that is potentially our future board. Thank you.
Oh, great, thanks. No questions?
No questions.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. I don't see any other planning board members. So, Dave Webb, why don't you go ahead?
Hi, yeah, just respond to what Representative Gaffney was saying. This does seem a bit premature as a warrant article for September town meeting, and I'm wondering if it could be postponed. But I think one nice thing to present at town meeting, either September or January, would be a report on the thinking of planning board and so forth, as Bill was saying. I think town meeting members would like to hear what's going on, and also about the MBTA delay and so forth. And it'd be nice to have a hopefully brief report, I guess, at the beginning of town meeting to discuss all that, probably unfortunately by Kristen. Thank you.
All right, good, Dave. All right, Monty?
Thank you, Madam Chairperson. I just want to point everybody to item 8.5.4.2.1 and point 2, and note that the last work on this particular thing was the town meeting reacting to multifamily housing being built in the town center by forbidding any multifamily housing in the town center. And so I don't see anything in what is presented here that would seem to alleviate any of the town meeting's concerns with the multifamily housing that was built before 2010 and caused this reaction. Is there some kind of, I'm looking at this minimum front yard, and many people were unhappy about having those large condo developments put right on the street. And the number of condo developments that were put over on the other side of the CVS there. So I'm just wondering how the planning board would present this to town meeting and explain how the kind of housing that was rejected before wouldn't happen again.
I see Brenda's hand up. I don't know if she wants to answer that, or Kristen, either.
Let me just
either one
answer
of you.
quickly, kind of structurally, to the question. So if you see in 8553 minimum front yard, the reason we put within the subject property at the time was directly in response to, oh, well, the sidewalk is a 10 feet of pedestrian area in front of the structure, isn't it? And none of us, the person who made that call is not, in the town, and it was we argued about it for a while, especially in regard to the residential property that's closest to the high school at 129 Cambridge Street, as to why it's so close. So the reason why the edit within the subject property sits there is directly in response to that particular concern. In terms of the more global concern of the 85421 and 85422, which I think, Monty, that's where you started. We didn't have it up, so I wanted to clarify.
Yeah, I mean, that was the town meeting's reaction to what was built before.
So that was, and it was brought by a town, it was a town meeting petition. So I think there at the time, I mean, the goal of the town center committee early on in the day of 2004, 2005, at least when I began to be involved, was to diversify the town center, trying to kind of Burlington was built in a car dependent era. There was a lot of curb cuts. There was a lot of front parking lots. And how do we make the town center more walkable, add more commercial space, but also look at the buffer between commercial space and single family residential neighborhoods. And we really looked to multifamily housing in places that were difficult to build commercial, such as where Burlington Heights is, because of the narrowness of that property, as well as properties such as where you see what now sits as Oak Ridge 1 and Oak Ridge 2 behind the used bookstore. And what we're looking, so anyway, so that was really where we wanted to start seeing multifamily. I think 2005, 2006 was the absolute height of the housing bubble. As much as we'd love to have diversity and having different uses come first, housing came first. We didn't have any housing. It was not necessarily a bad thing, but it came first and fast. We did have a criteria at the time of 25% of the town center can be housing. We did begin housing by right in the town center in 2004, 2005 with that potential cap. Here we're looking at a parcel by parcel rezoning. So it's kind of a question, do you need the cap if you're doing a strategic zoning change per property? And then the map that you just saw Liz show was looking at, and we know there's a lot of properties on it, and it's on purpose, and we want to discuss each one of them. But was to look at that, where's the area that are kind of not in the core commercial district, but those edges and fringe, especially if you continue where the Oak Ridge property behind CVS, and you look directly across the street to all of those kind of garage buildings, and that kind of no man's land of kind of could be a walkable neighborhood behind the commercial district of True North and so on, that what's the next chapter there? And that's why we included those properties. So, and I know I'm getting in a super roundabout, not answering directly the question, but with the town meeting petition, I think a lot of it was too much too fast. And I think what we're looking at now is a strategic approach to do a few things to kind of write the next chapter for some of our more aging properties that are not in the core of the commercial district and in the town center and do it and look at the parcels as you see the map kind of strategically. So yeah, sorry, that didn't answer directly.
That's okay, Kristen. I'm going to interject here for a second.
But the question,
maybe I'm going to try and see if Ann can answer your question, Monty, too, on two other aspects. So okay. I think you were asking about those two sections about, this is the town meeting's reaction back in 2010 to that big expansive. And so also to the point of last town meeting, where again, we rejected a multifamily. There are two things that are not known by town meeting members, some town meeting members and some residents, right? So we have the master plan, which has a housing element that talks about the need for transition from single family to, the commercial areas. And that's kind of what this can help do. The second part of that is that town meeting funded the housing needs assessment that is now complete, right? So that hopefully will be presented at town meeting in September, the housing needs assessment. And to Mr. Gaffney's point of, this would be rushed. I think we need to have all of the elements here to understand what we need for housing. All we have is anecdotal right now. Oh, we need more multifamily. Oh, we need more housing. We don't really necessarily know that yet. We have a master plan that suggests it, and now we'll have a housing need report that will answer some of those questions. What type of housing we need? Do we need more? So I think, again, this is something that it's good to keep going on this conversation, but I would agree as well that September to put this forward would be kind of rushed. So hopefully, Monty, that answers some of your questions as far as, do we need the housing? Where do we need the housing? And it's been 10 years since that, and a lot of things have changed, and these two documents will be able to help us determine that, I hope.
Well, I just would like to comment that while the area back behind where the commercial area is is one thing, but we're also talking about a very large area there at Terry Avenue. And that area is right up against Route 3A. And there is nothing in these, all I just want to say is there's nothing in these changes that would make someone think that you were going to try, that someone would put into that area very large housing development that has very little relationship to the rest of the town. And I think that if you're going to do zoning for a special downtown district, there ought to be some special requirements for the buildings to be things that people in town would like to see downtown, and not just anything that gets rushed into there, because I don't see anything in the wording that here that would prevent all kinds of strange things, not strange things, but all kinds of dense multifamily housing to go in here. You know, so I just think that needs to be much more thought out about how do we do so. If you want town meeting to pass this, you need to have guidelines and you know, buffers that are going to say, we're not going to do that kind of housing next time. This time we're going to do this kind of housing.
Right now, there is the town center overlay design review. And that's the reason I think the planning board is starting with this section, because there is that overlay that allows them to have design review. If we started this down at the mall, there's no design review down there. You could get whatever, you know, comes through. This goes through a design review process. So there is some kind of control at that. But again, to Monty's point, Kristen, these are the things that definitely would want to be, you know, discussed prior to putting this warrant article forward, so that, you know, we do have all the pieces in play.
Yeah, we agree. And I mean, these discussions are exactly what raise the questions we need to answer as we go through this process. So.
Okay, so I've lost track of, let's see, hands. Ernie, I guess you're planning board and ZBRC, so you'll be the transition into ZBRC. Go ahead, Ernie.
You're
But
on
you have to
mute.
unmute yourself.
Okay, is that better? Can you hear
Oh,
me?
much better.
Oh,
Welcome.
thank you. First, I agree with Bill. This can't make it to September, as far as I'm concerned, anyways. And I think it would be a too big a push. And if we say January, that gives us some time to discuss it and have these kind of meetings where planning board members are informed by the rest of the community, especially people who are involved and have something to say. But second, to Monty's point, originally when the town center overlay was put in, the housing had to be approved only by the planning board if somebody brought it forward. Now, the way I understand this new proposed zoning bylaw is written, it's really a town meeting approval. So it's almost, Monty, a case by case basis of whether the town meeting says yay or nay. So they're going to have much more input, and I think having that would definitely make sense. And I had another point, but I'm in Liz's camp and I forgot what it was. So thank you, Madam Chair.
Well, Ernie, I want to clarify on that point. This is Kristen, that we are looking at a proposed map. You can narrow that map to whatever we want to narrow it to. We want to probably look at more than one site and look at an area of sites. But once the map is rezoned into the overlay, it's the town meeting has zoned that piece. What we're doing differently here is when we wrote the overlay, it was this use was allowed everywhere. Now we're coming in strategically trying to look at properties where we do believe that housing would be beneficial or an option. And that's why the map is so important to look at as we move through this process of both zoning and the map amendment.
Okay, there's still obviously room for change, but yes, I stand corrected. Thank you. Thank you.
All right, Sally?
Thank you, Sherry. My question, I've actually two questions. Do we need an affordability clause here? Or would the general housing affordability and percent of affordable units that are already in the bylaws be applicable? I'm not sure if you want to make a distinction in the town center overlay. I know that if I recall back to 2010, that was an issue that came up. And my other question has to do with the design criteria and the guidelines. And are those going to be, is that something that would be put together prior to the bringing this to town meeting? In other words, do you have to have the design criteria, the design guidelines ready when you have the zoning changes come through? And who's doing the design review? And I think those are things that it's important to consider as you go forward.
So Sally, those are two good points. So the inclusionary zoning bylaw, I'm pretty sure it's Article 11, Section 6, which requires 10%, I mean, not 10%, 15% of units within development to be affordable in a multifamily, multifamily, which is anything 4 units and above, is governed by Article 11, Section 6. So and that applies here as well. So you need to include that affordability requirement of any multifamily construction. And it does not need to be separate unless you wanted to regulate it differently here in this provision. To the second point, the town center bylaw, as I mentioned, included housing by right when we adopted it, and also the design rules and regs it does focus quite a bit on commercial, but really to the structural elements of opacity of just the kind of the pedestrian and building areas and communication of changing the planes, making sure you have sloped roofs. All of that still applies to whether it's commercial or residential. So that's already in place. The zoning bylaw gives authority to the planning board to be the design review authority. Previously, when we did have the town center committee was very helpful in reviewing design, but was advisory to the planning board in the ultimate authority of design review, resting previously, right now, and will be continued in this with this iteration.
So will there be a pre-planning board review, or I mean, is that anticipated? We don't have anything in place at this point.
So I know you guys, and I agree, then the planning board and the board of selectmen are in discussions and should be in discussions about the town center committee in general and the roles of that town center committee. And I will admit that having the town center committee review design prior to the planning board was very helpful in the past. So I think that should be a discussion that continues with all of these boards, with the selectmen as well.
Thank you.
Okay, Kathy?
Thank you, Sherry. Can we go back to the map that Liz had up, please?
Good thing you guys are all technically savvy at this.
So I want to say that this particular map as a presentation for helping me to understand how this works is helpful because I can see the green, I can see the other things. I know that across from Shaw's on Terry Ave, that is a huge giant heat sink because of the asphalt. But this map helped me to visualize, as Liz was explaining, looking at the housing that is existing there now, and then looking at, rather than having warehouses or other things in there, having an area where you still have basically homes, multifamily homes that would be on there. That helps me. And so it would be good for me when you start off, or for town meeting, I think, when you start off with this type of a map. So I want to say for Liz and Kristen, a good job on that. And then I have a question, and that is, I don't have any opinions yet as to how this should develop going forward. I'm just, or even how the language should be. But I want to know, is it possible to have multifamily houses and the multifamily housing, but you've seen it where it's over the storefronts, so that you could have storefronts, but then you could also have, it mixed, basically.
So this bylaw does not prohibit that. What one of our questions in understanding the regulations is to make sure that the regulations don't kind of unduly make that not possible. I mean, the regulations key criteria are, we want to build housing in walkable town centers where there's mixtures of uses. So in the way it was written previously was a little bit awkward to have those mixed uses. And it was one of the comments that had been made of, if that's the goal, the criteria inherent herein is kind of a deterrent to getting to that goal. So we'll look at those regulations, but I hope that there is a provision for allowing for a mixture of not just standalone housing, but housing integrated in a mixture of uses, as you're describing. So I don't have an answer, but I'm just telling you, our goal is to ensure that those different iterations are possible.
Thank you. I can see with that one large block there and back behind the bookstore, and that those areas, if you can find a way to make that mixed use, it becomes more walkable. So I think that I can see where that opens up some new options for the town center as far as planning goes. Thank you.
And also just to note that I think is important, and not necessarily to this crowd because you guys get it, but just maybe to town meeting, to describe that when we're talking about an overlay in these areas, it's not changing what's allowed there now as uses. It's just giving an additional option to integrate a different residential use here, not taking away anything that was before. And I think that might be something that we should better describe when we're making this presentation.
Yeah. All right. I don't see any other hands. Oh, yeah, got it in there, Ed. Go ahead.
Thanks. I will just add my vote to the general impression that this would certainly go down in flames at town meeting in September. But that is no reason not to work on this, because I think what we lack here is planning, and lots of good ideas have been thrown out, and I think they're all nibbling around the edges rather than planning globally. And I think that they're not grappling with some really fundamental issues of what we want the town to be and what we want the town center to look like. And it is ignoring this whole issue of affordability. Yes, the master plan mentions that people want more affordable housing, but I'm not sure people really want that. And to the extent they say they do, I'm not sure that they've thought through it or that I believe them, because people vote against multifamily housing. And in the long run, we have little schemes to try to add affordable housing. I don't think from an economic standpoint that they are all that satisfactory or work long run. I think the way to have more affordable housing, well, there's really two ways. You can decrease demand by making your town less desirable, or you can increase supply. And we're only going to increase supply with 0 buildable lots left if we have more multifamily housing. So I think we need a global plan for multifamily housing. And I think we need to think very broadly about this and really keep at it. And that's all I have to say. Thanks.
All right, Ernie, is your hand up again?
Yes, yes, it is, Madam Chair, Sherry. I just want to remind everybody, and I'm sure everybody knows in the back of their mind, but we can do all the planning we want, but because we don't own the property, we really can't turn it into something other than what it is. We tried to incentivize owners in the town center to do that by giving them density bonuses, reducing some buffers, and allowing, as Kathy had said, residential over residential or offices over retail. But it's I mean, I guess the bottom line is we can zone this however we want, but unless the owners want to take advantage of that zoning, it doesn't happen. Thanks.
We need to find a way to encourage them to do that, right? And I think to Ed's point of a little bit of planning and globally thinking about those things and ways to do that. We've incentivized our larger corporations with tax increment financing things. Can we do that for the smaller? Who knows? That's a global, more, overarching thought process. Okay, so Ernie, I don't see any other hands. So I guess that kind of wraps up these. Kristen or Liz, did you want to add anything on any of the other, any of the 3 that we've talked about already before we move on?
Just to sum it up, I think you guys had some good comments on the other documents. We'll try to kind of incorporate those comments both on the drafts as well as suggestions for the backup and town meeting. But overall, I mean, I think this multifamily project, as we said on the onset of it, that we know there's a discussion that we need to continue to have, and we wanted to make sure we submitted it to begin that discussion, but also know that there's we want to look at those big questions, especially that Ed and Bill and others have kind of looked at, looking at the town center and how this lays out, and be strategic about meeting our goals and defining what that issue is that we're trying to solve, as well as trying to figure out what the state's looking for. So, but we look forward to continuing discussion, but I do think if we can move forward, groundwater along with stormwater as kind of that just water package, I think it's an important discussion that I'm not exactly sure when the Conservation Commission is discussing it within their board in terms of stormwater before town meeting, but I think it might be helpful to collaborate. They are different, groundwater and stormwater, but a joint message just on how water affects our neighborhoods. And I think that might be nice to have some of you involved in it, whether it's our meeting or the Conservation Commission's meeting, to figure out how to send that message before we actually get to town meeting. But other than that, thank you for all your comments.
That's good. So process-wise, I think Liz typed in the chat earlier that the print deadline is actually the Friday after your meeting, so the 19th. So if any, do you want comments as far as the language of any of these? Do you want people to send you that, or just hold off and bring them all to the meeting on the 18th, whoever can show up? Or how would you like we've gotten some general feedback, but if there's any like specific language changes or thoughts, do you want them sent to you or through me or through Dave?
I mean, Sherry and Dave Webb, it's up to you how you want to collect your committee comments. I'm okay if you want to send comments to planning@burlington.org, which goes to everyone in our, so it goes to Caleb, Liz, and myself and Jen. In terms of under kind of two categories, actual text changes to groundwater or the smoke shop. Multifamily, I really think we should be spending our time on those two to get to September. Multifamily, we have some time, but on those two particular, so text changes, absolutely critical to send to us. But as we do absolutely welcome suggestions for clarity as we move into town meeting, but that's less important as a priority to get to the print deadline. But no less important, but just focus on if there's a text question that.
Okay.
I would say send it directly to planning@burlington.org and copy your chair, whoever that may be. If you're land use or zoning bylaw review, to make sure that you guys see it. But if Dave or Sherry, you'd prefer to collect them all and send them as one, that's fine. That's your prerogative.
Yeah, it's really more about the timing wise, because it's kind of a quick turnaround. So that's why I didn't want to, we obviously don't have another meeting. I don't know, land use, I don't know when, Dave, when are you meeting?
We're probably not meeting until late in the month.
Okay.
So
All right.
this would have to be done separately from that if we needed to get comment. So I guess I can page the land use members and see if they have specific comments that we can gather together on those three warrant articles, especially the first two.
Okay. And I guess I'll say the same thing to ZBRC. Why don't you send anything to me directly, and then I'll send it to planning.org. And that way there's not that there'd be a million of them, but that way it's kind of centralized, I think. That may be better.
Okay, I just wanted to minimize your, open meeting with you don't want to chat too much about different things, but.
Right, correct, right. So, okay, so that's kind of wraps up the joint meeting as far as my thought process. I don't know, Chris, we have other things on our agenda for ZBRC. Certainly anyone is welcome to hang on and talk about those things. We were just going to talk about some future zoning issues, and then we have our meeting minutes as well too. So anyone is welcome to stay and chat. Otherwise, I would certainly recommend everybody show up to the planning board meeting next time and next week, next Thursday, right? And then we'll continue the discussions. Okay, so next on our agenda, if I recall correctly, is I had three things to talk about. The master plan, which I mentioned something earlier, and the zoning bylaws recodification, we kind of talked about that a little bit. And then I threw something in there, the Pero Farm. So master plan. Kristen, you're still here. And I think I sent you an email earlier this week. And I talked about it a little bit earlier. As far as, letting town meeting members know the status, where we are, where the planning board is, and, to answer town meeting that, we've kind of put all that energy and funds out there for it. Have you had any thoughts about presenting anything to town meeting in September, a report, an update, a status, and kind of about the implementation committee? I think, you guys have talked a little bit about it before. So if you have a minute and you're willing to elaborate.
Yeah, I certainly, I continue to say, and it still was, I think, one of the best process and projects that I've worked on in Burlington in the many, many years that I've been here. I was very collaborative. There was a lot of people at these committee meetings, and there was a lot discussed and a lot put into these plans, and a lot, as much as, anyway, so I do want to just emphasize how important the process of the discussion was to where we are today. We did hit a roadblock with, we hired, I don't know how much you guys know what the background of it, but we hired a consultant the person we hired left. Then that consultant firm got bought. Well, they got bought. Then the person we hired left. We had a different team come in. Then that shifted. So, and then anyway, so we had a great process, and we were trying to, very much keep it very positive, because the discussion was very positive. Behind the scenes, the consultant in the background of getting it done was very difficult. And essentially about a year and a half ago, our consultant kind of was like, we're done. So we were left with trying to figure out where we are, putting the pieces back together. And so what we have done is someone who spun off on their own that had been part of the process early on has helped us to put the final product back together. And there was a whole bunch of other stuff in between that I'm not going to get into, but and the fact that, as you guys know, and thank goodness we were able to grow our department at the last town meeting. Permitting is our statutory requirement in the planning department. I wished every day that planning was the number one thing we had to do every day. So in terms of our capacity and where we were with that and finalizing it, what I can, and Liz is still here. So Liz has been working very tightly with Emily Innes in Innes Planning Design to put all the pieces back together. We have a meeting with her tomorrow to discuss the final deliverables of that product. So our very hope, and I know I've been saying it for way too long, but our hope is that we do have that product very soon. But I do want to assure, and Liz and I have been talking about this, how much has been accomplished of a lot of the goals that were discussed as part of that process over the last couple of years, in terms of diversifying our economy and moving into the life science space. Let's see, I was trying to account them. Liz was like, we've passed 300 zoning bylaw changes. I was like, well, no, not since the master plan started, but we have been very, very active in moving forward some of these main ideas. I agree with all of you that it's helpful to have these ideas codified so we can move together with these ideas and work kind of off one document. And I think, and that's been the goal, it still is the goal, and hopefully we can continue that. And in terms of the implementation of all of the goals that have been identified and are and will be more finally identified in the plan, work toward implementation, which is that next step to continue implementation and the dialogue between especially these three committees of Land Use Planning Board and the Zoning Bylaw Review Committee, and how do we realize the rest of these recommendations of this plan, and how do we keep the discussion about the plan going? I mean, you guys have been, I think, very good, and the planning board, it's been really good over the last couple of years. I think that kickoff of really having a strong planning discussion, and Ed, to your comment just now about the town center and where do we want to be and what are the problems that we're trying to solve and what are the bigger global issues, I think is one that's completely on point as to the discussion and points of the master plan that are kind of more high level, and how do we drill down in the specific to make sure we're meeting those larger goals along the way as we in our decision making in the town. So Liz, do you want to add anything to that?
Not really. One of the other things that I kind of have been pushing with Emily, our consultant, is that so we were, by our last consultants, we were kind of given this really big, really long implementation matrix that was kind of clunky and hard to use. And so we're trying, what I want to be able to show to a town meeting or to have is the implementation matrix kind of redesigned, and then kind of what we've already accomplished thus far. So you can see that even though through all the discussions, stuff has happened. And so it's, I think that's an important point to make as well. And so it also gives us a good starting off point. You say, okay, so we're already working on all of these things. Let's codify them. And then where should we go from here? And so I think that's also an important thing that I kind of want to make sure is part of that mix as well, so that it's more user friendly.
Thanks, Lynn. So do you think, Kristen, that like January would be a target? Or it sounds like probably not September. You're still working on kind of wrapping it all up and putting it all back together. So thinking like, the reason I'm asking this is I really feel like in order for town meeting to understand what, instead of just each presentation that comes through, what this, so we want to like the overall picture of that. And so, and also as far as, you know, I said something in my email about a warrant article, and I know that, you know, there's town reports that we give to town meeting, but I really feel like as much as how many people actually residents come to town meeting, I don't know, but it's recorded. And I think like the residents of the town should know as well too. So, you know, if it's on the warrant, then it's a notice to the whole town. And I think that's really important for, you know, the whole scope of this.
So our discussion with Emily at this point is really trying to figure out what is it that we are able to announce in September, and what pieces can we anyway, we want to, whether the planning board has, you know, kind of said this, okay, here we go, here it is, by September town meeting. I think our goal is to really have a response, to have some sort of announcement about it.
Okay. Does anybody have any questions on that or anything? Okay, guess not. So next up was the, I think Betsy might have sent Kristen you a letter as well on this one about, you know, thinking about the whole zoning bylaws and just reviewing all of them in its entirety. And that's something that, you know, our committee, even though that's what we're here for, doesn't have the expertise to really get to that and to do all that. So we kind of started discussing about what is that process? Should we do it? Is it valuable to do? And we're kind of at the moment, there's a couple of us working on just really exploring that. You know, Betsy, I think put it up pretty clearly that, you know, what would be the purpose of it? What's the problem? And what we're trying to solve. And so I think at this stage, we were looking for your input, looking for, I think we sent it also, Betsy, correct me if I'm wrong, to town council, her input, and really about, you know, Betsy, you can speak to it a little bit better probably than I can, but really about just starting this process. Is it a worthy expedition?
Yeah, I think we're, as you said, we're in the very preliminary part of it, as whether this is something worth doing. And our thought was to get feedback, obviously from you, Kristen, and from Lisa Mead, but also to touch base with other towns who have actually gone through this process to see, you know, what kind of lessons they may have learned, what brought them to the point of actually undergoing it, who they used to help them, and how long it took, and those sorts of things, before we really then get a sense of what kind of resources would be needed in order to do this, how big a project would be, and if you have a consultant come in so it actually happens, how that all would work. So this is way early in it, but we want to make sure that if this is something that we do some investigation on and think that maybe it might be worthy of taking on a project and going to town meeting and asking for funding, that we have everybody on board with it and understand really what we're getting ourselves into before we get into it, and then find that maybe there's a reason we either shouldn't be doing it, can't do it, or whatever. So yeah, so Kristen, any feedback from, I think you were copied on, I think planning at Burlington was as well. So any of the thoughts that you all have about that kind of a project, you know, you may say, you know, we really don't need it at all because of blah, 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 but it would be interested in your thoughts.
Yeah, so I had a couple questions from that email and just for the whole group. So we did do a major recodification in 2009. If you look at the zoning bylaw, the second page of the zoning bylaw, it says, so when you look at it, approved by the Attorney General, April 16th. So first, the reorganization of zoning bylaw originally adopted under Article 37 of adjourned first town meeting, January 24th, 1977. Approved by the Attorney General, April 16th, 2009. So before 2009, that read January 24th, 1977 as the organization of the zoning bylaw. So in 2009, we set out to reorganize the whole zoning bylaw under a grant that came under what was called at the time the 43D. And you don't even want to see the red line versions of that amendment. But what we did do consciously was to reorganize, not change subject matter in that first attempt of reorganization. So what you see from 2009 to today is 2009 was the reorganization. So you're looking at, okay, chapters, we had definitions all over the bylaw. We put them all in chapter 2 and just kind of organizing principles, but we didn't change any of those definitions in that warrant article because it was too much to, it would just blow people's minds to change the organization and then change subject matter. So what we did was we reorganized the whole thing. And then from 2009 to now, we've been kind of piece by piece. And I mean, as you see, when permitting slows down, planning ramps up. So I mean, you're going to see a lot of changes in that 2009, 10, 11, 12 time period because we were, post recession. We were doing a lot of planning. We did a lot of the PDs that you see now. But anyway, and then 2013, everything started back up again. Third Ave was under construction, and it went a little bit slower. But we did do a massive reorg in 2009. So I just wanted to bring that up. The second question I had was to your email. You mentioned, and I don't have the full thing written out, but in the notes in front of me is there was a couple guiding principles you were looking at. One, there was a statement of, over the last year, we've seen things that quote needed immediate concern, that were immediate concern. That was one. And then the second was things that don't conform to Mass General Law, things that are not consistent with the master plan, or things that there's an enforcement issue. So my question for the first, what are those things that have been identified in the last year that need immediate attention? And then on the second piece, the things that don't conform to MGL, we have identified with town council. We are working on things like the wireless, our wireless overlay that we received some town funding a couple of years ago, knowing that the FCC, there were new FCC laws that came into effect that changed a little bit of our bylaw. Liz, what was the second thing that we were talking about today? Talking about something else that we're actively addressing in modifying because of a conflict with Mass General Law. But overall, I think I can safely tell you unless we go to case law that our zoning bylaw conforms with Mass General Law, and that's what we're here for and what town council is here for. In terms of the master plan, I think it's absolutely the right direction to go in to make sure our zoning bylaw is looking and gets us to the goals that are identified in the master plan. I do think that's something we should do. And to the enforcement question, is there a need to have teeth where there aren't teeth? And I think so. To the things that quote need immediate attention and things that are enforcement issues, what I really hope for from you guys is to help us better understand what the defined problem is in those areas or what needs immediate concern for us to then understand how to best respond to that in terms of why the zoning bylaw is the way it is. Because as I said to you guys a lot of times, Liz and I, and you're like, well, is it perfect? No, absolutely not. The zoning bylaw is not perfect, but there's so much in the zoning bylaw that is not governed by things that we control. It's governed by the state statutes. It's governed by case law. The outcome of this case said this, so we have to have the definition of something else. And I guess to what I was talking to Liz about earlier, it's we respect that decision. We might not like it and it might seem cumbersome and it might seem whatever, but it is what it is. And then anyway, so there's just a lot of layers when you get into this, that there's reasons for why it is. So I guess the first piece that I just really want to help get a better understanding from you guys on is what are the issues or problems that you have identified in terms of a use or a regulation or a certain language in the bylaw and or the enforcement issue that you bring up that needs immediate attention or attention for this process. So I guess that's just my overall first response, of just understanding what the issue is, so we can best try to figure out a way and a pathway forward to solve whatever that is.
The only other thing I would add is, well, you guys know, I would assume maybe not, but so all the warrant articles for the zoning bylaw obviously get checked by us. They get checked by our town council, and then after they're voted in by town meeting, that everything is sent to the Attorney General's office to make sure that it does comply with Mass General Law. So there's like a triple check there. So if it, let us know if you think there is something out of line with Mass General Law. But as far as we are concerned, the Attorney General has blessed everything thus far that's in there. So just wanted to make that note as well.
So I think, so there's a couple of things, if I can jump in here, and Betsy help me along with this. But along with the Mass General laws, no, I don't think our intention was to say that we don't comply with Mass General laws. It's more about, we're the text people, right? So there's many different references to Mass General laws in many different ways in there. So that's just something text-wise that, at least from my perspective, that's what we're talking about, is how it's referred to. Do we refer to it in the sense of, a certain way every time? It's different throughout the bylaws. So that's kind of where it is. Some people have said we should link it to the Mass General Law but I don't think we want to do that. And that's more of a structural thing. But so that was the Mass General Law part. And I think you mentioned something else about the immediate concerns. And Betsy, if I'm wrong, let me know. But we were saying that immediate concerns always come up. So we don't get to look at the bylaws specifically. So all of our immediate concerns are the permitting, right? So you're doing the permitting. So can we, alleviate one aspect of looking at the zoning bylaws as a whole, with a consultant with us to do this. And I think it's some of the things coming down the road, right? The MBTA, we're going to have to, do some things to the bylaws with that. We have started talking about with ZBRC with some specific things, the accessory use section of, both in some of the definitions and in some of the use tables and things like that. So there's a few things that we've, come across that, we're thinking that, an overall, I guess audit or something might be of value. But again, that's what we're so early on in this process that's what we're coming to you for as well, is to see, is it a worthy task for us to look at? Betsy, add on if you.
No, you said it all very well. Thank you. Yeah, I think to that point, just one thing I want to underline is that I think when we first started CBRC, one of the things we thought we were going to do is take on certain sections, and we had, the building inspector and the ZBA there, and they would identify problem areas that they thought the words could be tighter or whatever to help them so that they could do their jobs easier and ultimately for the citizens of Burlington to understand what the deal is, or builders or whomever. And so we were trying to take a kind of step back, strategic look at all of this and see how we could approach all the bylaws that way. But since we have been in, since we've been around, there always just seems to be something that comes up that takes us out of doing that. I mean, it could be we're going to look at the wording and we put together a mission that we want them to be concise and clear and all of that sort of thing. But we really haven't had a chance to go through the bylaws to actually do what we thought we were going to do right from the get-go. So in looking at some of the other towns who did go through it, they brought in outside help. So this is not to say that the recodification that was done in 2009, I think that is awesome, because that, kind of set us up so that now we can kind of look at the next level of clarity that we want to have. But at the same time, there's been no lack of issues that we've had to deal with as a ZBRC in terms of things that have come up and that require that kind of attention. And that's where we've kind of put all our energy. So we haven't really gotten to what I think we thought initially that we're going to do. And, Kathy, I see your hands up, and this is something that you're so good at, like looking at the words and really making sure things are clear, or asking questions and those sorts of things. But I think that's kind of where we're coming from. So I'll stop there.
Can I just interrupt for 1 second, and just for my moment of the fact that you guys are beginning to Burlington is a little bit like a fire hose of kind of like, we're just, all of this is happening and there's nothing linear about the way you can take on any task, because it's just all happening and there's all these different reasons and timelines. So anyway, I just wanted to say I totally get it. And I think, and I'm actually kind of touched for the first time that I'm feeling like you guys are kind of getting it, that, there's this plan and we're going to do this. Oh my God. And then a freight train comes through the living room and it's okay, I guess we're going to do that.
Yeah.
And it's just the way in which that we need to kind of think about planning and really trying to understand that, yes, this is happening, but planning is a really important thing we need to be continuing to do in Burlington to make sure that all these things that are happening kind of crazy are also in line with a greater vision. So
Yes, take a bow. I mean, the whole thing of the CBRC being brought was, oh, well, we're going to take the zoning bylaws off the planning department's hands so that you guys can do more planning. Because I've always said, as long as I've been around this town for 30 years, the planning board needs to do more planning, right? So let's get the ZBRC going and we'll review the bylaws and you guys, we can take that off your hands. Okay, so now, 4 years later,
then it comes back to us anyway. So.
Yeah,
right.
And now 4 years later, it's like, wow, we can't even get to it. So, and that's kind of where this all kind of started from. Go ahead, Kathy, we've been yapping.
Thank you. So I want to say, when we first got together and we were thinking about what we would do, we did not know what we were doing. We sort of guessed at things, but what we did do right is we put together our mission statement and our guidelines, and we came up with that form for people to fill out, which I think when it's been used has been very helpful. And so I'm hearing almost a disconnect here. I understand entirely, Sherry and Betsy, what you're looking at doing and bringing somebody in to look at the language and identify problems in the current zoning bylaws. And I'm sort of hearing Kristen wishing she had the expertise somewhere in our committee where we could actually help craft some of the things, the zoning bylaws that need to be pulled together, and that we could help better with that. Did I misunderstand that, Kristen? But for that, we need to have 2 or 3 attorneys on our team. So we have to go out and recruit people. We need to recruit attorneys to town meeting so that they can join ZBRC and help with this, because this is, to me, it's pretty high level stuff. I can look at the language, and I've been a long time proponent of writing laws in plain English so that people can understand them, rather than coming up with legalese. A lot of laws that are written are just plain, it's poor writing. And that's part of where we started. But Kristen, what is it that we can be doing proactively that is going to bolster planning for Burlington?
So I think that's the question. And I don't think any committee needs more attorneys. I like attorneys. I almost thought about being an attorney, but no more committees.
It
need
just
some more
makes
attorneys.
meetings long.
But anyway,
We can
I
always
think-
kick them off if they don't play nice.
I
But-
think, but I think what's really needed is, you know, and I think I said that when you guys formed is, you know, it's great to be working on zoning amendments, but the biggest thing that you guys, especially as members and representatives of town meeting, is, you know, when we're taking these amendments to town meeting, is what we're doing solving a defined problem that has some consensus building around it, and you guys are representatives of town meeting, and so therefore, where's the planning issue that we can either just what's the issue, and what do we need to know from town meeting and the general community to understand what we need to understand around that issue? And then, so I guess more of what I think is beneficial to us is the not necessarily and you guys have been very good at it of crossing the T's and dotting the I's, but generally getting a consensus around forming and defining the problem. And so then we can talk about what are possible planning solutions to get to an answer that then moves into a zoning bylaw change. But a zoning bylaw change is the last step of getting somewhere, kind of, and it's therefore, so there's all these steps before it as to, you know, is this like what's happening in the community? Why is it happening? Why does our landscape look like that? Why are we paving? Why are we creating so many parking spaces? Do we need this many? Are these are the parking tables too high? You know, just we really, I think, need to start asking like that 5 levels of questioning to define the problem that then a regulation needs to change. Because I don't think, we don't want to over-regulate Burlington. We want to regulate to the point of making sure that our outcomes are achieved. And if they're not being achieved, is it because of a regulation or is it because of something else? And if it's because of a regulation, then why does it exist? And kind of go through that process of understanding how it came to be, and then working with the planning department and maybe an outside consultant, or maybe, you know, as to why that exists. Is that regulation something that we have the control to change or not?
So,
because some of them we don't.
so a lot of that, we sort of go all over the place outside of just the language, and there's the consensus building. When you talk about that, I get that. I'm also looking at us not to be a sort of redundant mini planning anything. We should have a different purpose.
But you're representatives of the legislative body. You guys are the ones that are voting on those changes. So it's like,
Okay.
how do you, I mean, I think that's the piece that is so helpful. And when we meet with you guys, and over a lot of years, when we meet with you guys and talk about how we best present the problem and the solution in a graphical way, or what background information do we need to know? I mean, all of that is actually the most help that we have, you know, as we prepare for town meeting, because you guys are town meeting. And so just in terms of kind of what you're thinking about in the mission, it's, I mean, just like in the planning board, and Ernie knows this, is the decision of the planning board is the very last step in the whole discussion among an applicant and the planning board and negotiation. The decision is just the end point of that. So, and a regulation is just the end point of that discussion to and to what you guys are pushing us to say, what's the purpose of this? Why are we doing this? So to answer that, why are we doing this, is why are we doing this? What problem are we solving? And then how do we best convey it to the legislative body to move it forward? So
But
I know that's a little bit up here and not as much like exactly what the sentence structure and so forth and consistency, but to
No,
my point of view, it's super important in the process, and you guys are at the perfect place to help shape that discussion, I guess.
And then with that, it is, okay, when we're going to try and move there, how does the zoning bylaw make that happen? Because planning, okay, so you've clarified a couple of things. So because we are town meeting members and we're not elected to the planning board, we are different, but we're asking a lot of questions. And at the end, it does come down to, how do we take what the planning board, the planning department, other people, developers in town, how do we take the visions that they bring and how is that being reflected in the zoning bylaws? Is that, did I miss that or am I off track? Sherry, Betsy, anybody? Ernie's going, shut up, Kathy. Never mind.
All right, Ed's gonna answer. He's got his hand up.
Yes, I am. So I'm the one who brought up the question of why do we want to do this with the recodification, and I think the big picture idea I had was that we thought that the structure of it could be revisited and rearranged to make it more useful, and I think usability is the only excuse I've come up with for why we'd want to undertake this, and I think Kristen has informed us that that was reviewed 13 years ago, and it's in reasonable shape. It's always been an open question, and I think maybe we're getting closer to an answer for me of whether I just didn't understand the zoning bylaws and the legalese and history and all the precedents, or if it's just hard and complicated, and I think the answer is it's just kind of hard and complicated by its nature, the way the bylaws come together. And so, there isn't a magic wand we can wave and change the structure and make them much more useful and readable. And I do think that when we see housekeeping things we could do, and maybe we should concentrate on a chunk like, well, the references to MGL are done in different formats in different places. So maybe we can just rip through and search those out and harmonize those. And that's a good housekeeping exercise. Fine. But I don't know if changing the structure and recodifying is what we want to do. And I think Kristen just, opened up a whole other thing we should think about. And maybe it's time to revisit the mission statement a little bit. We have in order to prevent scope creep, we really tried to focus in on the language and the meaning, and not try to get into the bigger issues because we could get off on digressions. But one part that we did write in that I mentioned earlier is to make sure the language is aligned with the purpose, and that means forcing people to tell us our purpose at the beginning. But I think maybe we can expand on that a little more, and there are some cases, and one really came up tonight which was the multifamily district, where maybe we need to put our pencils down for a change and go read the master plan and see if there really is a big vision, and think about how we can help sell it to town meeting, because we're the interface, as Kristen described, between town meeting that really isn't going to put in the time to understand how the zoning bylaws work and how they relate to reality, and people who are really in the weeds, which is in the planning department. And I think we could be useful having more conceptual projects where we can be helpful in articulating the big picture plan to town meeting, and then, you know, they can see how these zoning changes fit into a bigger framework, and not just react to, well, how is it going to impact my backyard, which is how most people react to a zoning bylaw change that gets presented. You know, they're just looking for the offense to them and their property. And I think we need to be thinking about how this just makes the nature of the town better in a 10-year perspective, 20-year perspective. And I know, Ernie, your comment was born of much wisdom that you can't force the property owners to do something in particular, but I think that you can, if you have the vision and the zoning is aligned to that, then, the market incentives can be expressed, and maybe in 10, 20, 30 years, things evolve towards, the vision that we've got. So, maybe there's another big picture thing that we should be considering besides recodifying the language.
Yeah, I think we should come back. My vote is that, first of all, it's late and we've been going on too long. And I think this is a project that we need to go back and revisit, Ed, to your point, and see where we want to best use our time that's not directed at very specific warrant articles as they are emerging. And so I think we table this for now, and then let people go have their evening, and then.
But I think Kristen was saying that we are very useful going on the specific zoning.
Yeah, no. Yeah.
That is where the benefit has been. Is that
right?
correct?
I'm not saying that we're not going to do that. I'm just saying this recodification project and this is the point of sending out the email, is to get feedback on it. So the objective has been achieved in terms of receiving feedback about this project. So I think maybe Sherry and I need to kind of go back and say, and let's bring back to ZBRC at another time. Probably we're going to put this thing on hold.
We're not going to end the meeting before talking about Perro Farm, right? That's Perro for dog. Do we have a dog farm?
No.
Never mind.
No. I think we can probably table that till next meeting, because
Okay.
I want to get the.
Maybe you could tell me what it is. So
yeah, right. If you could tell me what it is too.
All right. Hang on. Perro Farm. It's a property. Hold on. I'm going to share my screen. So it's the last aggregate. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yeah.
Everybody went quiet. Okay.
Yep.
Let me see if I can get a little bit bigger, and let me see if I can figure out where I am. Oh, here I am. Okay. So I'm circling the area on the map. This is Lexington Street. We're coming from the center of town. We're coming down Lexington Street, and there's a big bend in the road. And this is, I think, South Bedford Street here, or Stony Brook, one of those two. And then you're heading down towards the mall. This large property right here, which is really weird cutouts, is a piece of property. It's about 7 acres. It's called the Perro Farm. It's the last agricultural property in Burlington.
Wow.
As such, the town has a right of first refusal should this property ever come for sale. And there's a whole bunch of Mass General law about it. And I just wanted to bring this kind of to, it doesn't really have much to do with us, but as town meeting members, and as, interested parties in land, I just wanted people to know about this. It has been some talk about this property perhaps going up for sale soon. And the town doesn't have really at the moment a way to react to this, right? If the owner decides to sell this parcel, he can get a buyer, and then he has to give notice to the town of Burlington to say, do you want it? Do you want to buy it? Whatever. And we don't have a mechanism right now to be able to do that quickly. So there was some concern about, trying to see if there is a way to do that. And of course, one way is if we all pass the CPA and then we have a funding source, but that's years down the road. So anyway, it's not really much of a discussion topic other than the fact that it came to my attention, it was brought to my attention that the family that the Pero family still owns this. And there may be some discussion sometime soon. And we just had the property over on Wellesley Ave that, you know, went up for auction and the town couldn't really do anything. We couldn't buy the property. And not that the town should be in the real estate business, but, you know, we don't want to pass up an opportunity either to save open space or whatever we would want to use this for. People have talked about it could be just left as open space. There is a lot of wetlands on it. Do we want to have, you know, another cul-de-sac with, you know, 8 more big houses on it? Or do we want to put some sort of affordable housing in there or whatever? I don't know. But I just wanted to bring it to people's attention, and Kathy's jumping up and down wanting to say something. And then Kristen wants to say something. And then Ernie wants to say something. Okay. So anyway.
I need for you to call me and talk about this, because along there, the cemetery area where the barn was, used to be the People Helping People community farm. And that might be, I don't know what the property is like there, but since it's agricultural, that may be a way to keep it as a farm and also as a learning area for people who live in town. So I just wanted to bring that up, plant that seed, water it. I terribly miss the fact that that had to be taken over for cemetery use, which understandable, but if this is the last piece of agricultural land, it would be very interesting for it to be a community farm. So
right, I mean,
yeah,
there's actually a farm, dilapidated farm building on there. It's the turkey coop or whatever.
Yeah, chicken farm.
So anyway, Kristen, go ahead. And then Ernie.
Sure. So Sherry actually gave a really good presentation on what this property was. So yeah, it's the old chicken coop. So the Pero farm, the Peros actually also owned the Chandler Road property. The Pero family, the elder Peros, I believe, have passed away. It's the properties are in trust, so all the kids are trying to figure out what to do. Which anyway, so Sherry, you're right. There is something going on with these properties, and there's something that's going to happen. This property is under what's called Chapter 61A protection. I have an email that John Keeley sent to me that describes all what you have to do with Chapter 61A. So I can't describe the whole thing, but it is a right of first refusal by the town, because this property is in agricultural. So therefore it's been not necessarily exempt, but it's been paying taxes at a very low rate compared to what it would have if it was single family residential. So therefore there's kind of a provision that there needs to be back taxes if it's sold and taken out of 61A. So my comment to this committee, and I think the planning board is probably going to discuss just more of a strategic plan around this. Like, what are we thinking about? I think that there's been some discussion with the selectmen in the past, and it's kind of like, oh, I don't know. But I think in terms of kind of weaving that thread of planning and being strategic about our decision making, I think this is a perfect opportunity to make it known to whether it's town meeting or the selectmen, or I'm not exactly sure the process of who goes first in terms of this discussion, but I do think it's a piece of property. It's not gigantic, but it's big enough that there should be some discussion before it's just, disposed out of 61A and then just, another subdivision being built, which maybe that's the way, maybe that's what we want to happen, but there's not a lot of properties like this in terms of the right of first refusal. And to share your point, the ability to act quickly is something that we need to think about. And we know it's in play. So why don't we prepare ourselves for an outcome that might be the best outcome for Burlington. So I do think that it's ripe for discussion, and I think you guys should think about how you want to, message that to the powers that need to be involved in this decision.
Yeah, I think that's the big thing. It's the acting quickly, that there's timeframes with all of this that, that the town has to act. And I don't know how, if we can act quickly enough. So is it a sense of giving, the select board the opportunity to negotiate? I don't know if that's something. So hopefully it will come before a select board meeting at some point. And Kristen, to your point of planning board, and all of us can talk about it and just kind of force the issue to be able to do something about it and not lose the opportunity. And again, in the end, does it end up as a subdivision? And maybe, but at least we want to be able to have that, decision made by us instead of someone else. Ernie.
Yeah, if I could just 2 points of information to Kathy's subject on community garden. I believe Peter Capola is doing quite a bit with that now, and I think it's the gardens behind Francis Wyman School. I know he's supplying quite a bit of fresh produce to people helping people. And the second point of information is the second cemetery that we have in town, Pine Haven. That's how that came about. That was a farm. I believe the last 2 remaining owners were 2 elderly sisters, but that was a friendly negotiation. And I believe they asked for a house to be built for them, which is the house that abuts the cemetery at the moment. And then as far as I remember, that took a couple of years to actually come to fruition. And in the meantime, it was used as a community garden, and really we got a lot of produce out of it. But that's how that cemetery came about. That was a farm before, and the town exercised its right of first refusal, but it was a friendly negotiation. I believe the last surviving owners were not really interested in seeing it turned into a subdivision, so that helped a lot too. Thanks.
Okay. Ed?
Yeah, the first Peter Capola was first name that came to mind when I heard the beginning of the explanation. He's very interested in preserving the agricultural history through the Historical Commission. The CPA would fund the historical preservation well beyond what we've ever actually funded it to. And I think filling that gap and figuring out how we're going to apply that is maybe one of the slow steps to getting people to sign on to the CPA in November. And this would be a great project. It would take a few years to save up, a lot of years to save up, I imagine, because I just looked it all up. It's 7.5 acres. I'm guessing you could put a road through, maybe put 12 houses there. So, we'd be looking for $6 million. And so having that money on hand is what is going to be the problems in reacting quickly to this. So I think we need to really investigate what they're thinking about in the Gene A. Pero Revocable Trust. And maybe they're willing to wait for the CPA to save up enough money to buy that. We may have to write an option that actually has a purchase price in it to entice them to not sell quickly. But that, we need to talk, if something's to be done here, we need to talk to the selectmen, tomorrow morning, I would think, just based on the business case here. I would think the heirs would want to dispose of this quickly, while the real estate market still looks good.
We have to look at a map and find out where the wetlands are, because that also, and where the road access is.
Yeah, the satellite photo says it's pretty wooded right now, so undeveloped.
Oh, there you are.
Oh, look at this.
If nothing else, I do do my homework. So, right, this is all the wetlands back in here.
I
This
see.
is the little
Yeah, so that's a
there,
lot of
here, so-
wetland.
Yeah, so, yeah.
So
But
that
we don't
isn't
really-
buildable.
Okay,
Half
so
the
then,
property, not
yeah,
buildable.
so maybe it's 2 or 3 million.
Yeah, so we just saved ourselves some money, all because of
Yeah.
water. Sally, go ahead.
Thank you, Sherry. So we looked at this as part of the facilities committee. Town meeting, for those who don't know it, town meeting has a facilities committee. And it's been generally inactive since we made a report about all of the available or potentially available properties in town back in like 2012 or 2010. And this came out, this and the Building 19 site were among the most promising, as well as what was the Casey and Hayes site, which is now the DPW rec utility site. It's finding the will and getting that mantra to the selectmen. When I asked Mike Runyon a few years ago why we just let the Building 19 site go, he said, well, it cost $6 million. And if you think back to what our needs are, I mean, our needs have been identified for years. You know, we need a police station site. Well, Building 19 site could have been a great place for it. There's so much, a nice community center, there's so much. And really, I think that if people had been organized and gone to the select board and said, hey, we need something, we need you to do something, then they respond. But it really takes going to them and saying, you know, it would be foolish to not get this property. And they can always call a special town meeting to get approval for a bond. Just my 2 cents. I've been frustrated with this stuff for a long time.
Kristen, did you say that there's, you are talking with the select board, the planning is talking with the select board? Is there a kind of process already in place?
No. It's more sidebar conversation with an interested developer. They're kind of like, oh, the Perros, they talked to the selectmen said, I don't know, they didn't want it. But my point is that a one-on-one very narrow discussion about maybe one thing, whereas we need to have a global discussion of opportunities that may be realized if we can strategically think about the site. So that's my only point. So I wasn't saying that there's been any formal conversation that I'm aware of. But you know, this site is, there's a site that is people are finding out about, and therefore there's going to be something that happens. I mean, when properties like this, I mean, I'm not sure if it's all family or if it had to go out to probate or what, but I mean, the minute that happens, it's like, it's, you know, free information everywhere. And we just need to make sure that if there is something that we're looking at, that, you know, we're having a collaborative discussion among us and those that need to be the decision makers. And, you know, so.
I do
Well,
know
here's an idea. Here's an idea. See this road, see where the at the top part of that wetlands, that road, Willow Way. So one of those houses here that's where Monty lives.
Right.
Let's get Monty on this.
So we've known about this for a long time. I'm right here over here on this street on Hickory. So yeah, this is our neighborhood.
I'd be happy to share our very old report with with anyone who wanted to see.
Well, that'd be good. That would be good. I do know that John Keeley from Conservation, because I had a nice conversation with him about this. And he was going to forward a bunch of information to the select board. So is that how you got it as well, Kristen?
Yes, he was forwarding that, but I need to go, but
Okay,
great
that's fine.
conversation
Okay,
tonight.
bye, Kristen. Thanks. Okay.
But yes, I think John has been active, and not necessarily for conservation purposes, just for the same reason I think we're all talking about it. Like, let's just make sure we're talking about it.
Okay, sounds good. Thanks, Kristen. I appreciate everything.
Thank you.
Okay, bye, Liz. You too. Okay, so real quick, if we can just get the meeting minutes in, if I can, I'm going to stop sharing that, and then I'm going to pull up the meeting minutes somewhere here. We can dispense with these real fast, and then I'll be happy, and then we can go. Is that large enough for you?
I can't see it.
Yeah,
We
it's
don't have it.
not-
We have
no.
pictures.
Oh, it's not green yet. It's blue. Now it's green. Okay. Now can you see it?
Can
Where do you
see
see
it.
the map? No, you got it?
No.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, all right. So hopefully people have read them and we don't really have to go through them, but I'll
Right.
just scroll somewhat quickly, and if there's anything major, any issues?
I
So
move that
this-
we, go ahead.
Yeah, is this the revised? Because I've got the Google Doc open and it's got the redlined changes.
Oh, somebody made changes.
Yeah,
hold
just
on.
grammar stuff. I can recommend approving.
I
With the grammar
abstain.
changes? Okay, hang on a second. I guess I should have pulled that one up, huh? Where are we? Meeting minutes.
I can share it if you want to look at what's up. There we
Okay,
go.
how's that?
That's
Is
the
that
one.
the right one? Yep, you're right. People did this and didn't pay attention. Okay. Is that large enough for people to see?
No.
Yep.
No. Better?
Yes.
Fine.
Good. All right, so we had a couple of changes there. Oh. So you can see.
This looks good to me.
I move we approve as amended.
Second.
Okay, all right, I'm just gonna call your name, Betsy,
Yes.
Kathy,
Abstain, I wasn't there.
okay, Ed,
Yes.
Mark,
Yes.
Sally,
Yes,
Tamara,
Yes.
Sherry, yes. 4, 5, 6, 0, 1, okay.
motion
So
to
if any
adjourn.
guys, oh, 1 second, and then you could do that. Just if anybody has, I know Mark, I think I saw some comments. Is Mark still here? I'm not seeing. Oh, yeah, there's Mark. I know you made some comments on the zoning bylaw amendments. If anybody else has any changes, go to the Google Doc and put them on there. And Friday, I'll send them to Kristen. I don't think we need to do the town center town multifamily one, whatever that one is, because I don't think that's going anywhere. So I don't think that's going to be put in the warrant. Hopefully not. But the other two, if you have any changes, get to them by Friday, and then I'll give them to Kristen. So that's all I
Should
have
we
to say.
get Kristen's new version of the groundwater?
I think
She sent it, I think, to everybody, didn't she?
Did I?
But it's not in a
get it up there
Google
too?
Doc for editing.
It's not in the Google, so I didn't get it up there. Okay, she did send
Okay.
it to me, so I will
Yeah.
put it in there after the meeting tonight, and then you can go on there
Okay.
and such. Thank you very much. Now I'll take that motion.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Sounds good. Thanks, everybody. That
Night.
was a long one. Thank you,
night.
Emily.
Okay, thank you.
Thank
Okay,
you.
take care.
Bye.
Night.